Welcome everyone to the session today. It's great to see you all. And I do see some comments in the chat box about not having your video on, and I do understand about bandwidth issues. So we will do our best to have the video on, and if you're not unable to turn your video on, just let me know through a chat or through raising your hand, and we'll make sure that all of your comments and questions get raised through the broader group. So at this time, I would like to introduce Chuck Elder-Hume. And Chuck Hume, do you have some comments and an opening for us this morning?
Yeah,
there you go.
There, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I'd like to say good morning to everybody. I think today is going to be a very important day, and especially with the water strategy. It's something that, you know, I've, as an elder, looked forward to for a long time, and I think it's very important we look at this in a way that you know, that all First Nations throughout the Yukon have free access to water. It's very important to the elders, and I know the youth also, because they're the ones that are going to suffer in the future. So we need to look forward to their strengths. And I welcome especially the youth that are here and the participants that are also here. I'll say my prayer in my language, and from there we'll continue on. Panishish the Kandako, the Jean Dun Gorati, Horgachenshu, Gorati, Shokwathan Kukan Taje, or Majuna Shumaku Gorati, Shokuch Edo, Ita Dunson, Kukar Shokwathan Gakuch Ed, Pado, Show Nithan, Show Shamo. Ita Zino, Shokuchena, Johnson Narakel, who soon Johnson Narakeshu, Kukan Taje, Shokuche Gudo, Kunishish Kandako, Kunishish. Thank you. And I prayed for our children that we leave at home, our grandchildren. And when people travel on the highway, look after yourselves and be careful. Always look after yourself and the people around you, and especially the children. Thank you.
Yeah, my Elder Hume. Thank you for those great words to open us with, and to bring all of our minds together with this important work that we have to do today. I'm just going to start out with some introductions, if you don't mind introducing yourself, providing your name, what organization or First Nation you're working from, and your role there. I will start. Good morning, Scano Seguego. My name is Amy Lickers. I am actually from Six Nations of the Grand River, which is in Ontario, where I am today, and I will be acting as your facilitator. Who would like to go next? I'm just going to look at my screen, and I'll call your name if you don't mind. Emily, you're just to my next here, so I'll ask if you can go next.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Danche, Emily McDougall Uye, Kwanlun Kwachani Che, Ayenji Shokwathan, the Zhao Ida, Miga Shonithan, de Kanuta Che. I work as the climate change coordinator for the AFN Yukon region. I'm a citizen of the Kwanlun First Nation, and I belong to the Wolf Clan. And I'm really happy to be joining these conversations today. We had a full day of water sessions yesterday, and we had a wonderful water ceremony on World Water Day. So it's really great to be continuing on those dialogues, because we know water is so important to us.
Thank you, Emily. Next, we have Courtney.
Morning, everyone. Courtney Dawes. Oh, there we are. I'm Courtney Dawes. I am a senior advisor to the regional chief and AFN Yukon, and I'm the acting regional water coordinator. So just helping to organize these events and these engagements. So thank you all for coming. I am actually I live in what is now called New Westminster on the unceded territories of the Hul'qumi'num and Hul'qumi'num speaking peoples. And I just, as I said, I wanted to thank everyone for taking time out of their incredibly busy days today to join us and give your thoughts on this important topic. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Courtney. Next, we have Delaney.
He just stepped out. She'll be right back.
Okay. Elder Hume, is there anything that you would like to say as well too? Another introduction?
Okay, I'm from the Champigny-Jacques First Nations and elder, and I elder for Assembly First Nations representing the Yukon Territory. And some of the portfolios that I actually sit on is fisheries, water, traditional knowledge keeper, sit with the UNDRIP, and also housing. And we have another elder just being appointed now, Mary Jane Jim, who is my sister-in-law. So I think it's very important. Like I say, what we do today is going to be very beneficial. That we look forward to what the younger generation is doing. Thank you very much.
I agree. Thank you so much, Elder Hume. You are working in a lot of really important areas. Irving, would you like to go next?
Help me with being a long in additional costs, we can come in and now we see into them. Assembly First Nations, then kid to we go on the B. Thank you, Amy. Irving LeBlanc or Bing. I'm from Wikwemkong unceded territory up on Manitoulin Island, up on the Georgian Bay, North Shore. I'm Odawa and Weagle Clan. I'm the Director of Infrastructure at the Assembly First Nations. And up until March 1st, I was the Director of Housing, Infrastructure, Water, and Emergency Services. And with the reorg, I'm now the Director of Infrastructure, which basically includes water, this work that we're doing here. Just want to welcome to everybody. Look forward to a good discussion that we had yesterday. Thank you. Oh, before you switch it off, I want to, almost forgot to acknowledge the territory that most of you are sitting in. I want to thank Elder Hume Knowledge Keeper Hume for the opening prayers again, and acknowledge the territory of the Kwanlin Dun and Tan Kwachan, and where I'm sitting, acknowledge the territory of traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquins, namely Kitigan Zibi and Anishinaabe. Thank you.
Nyawabing. Autumn, would you like to go next?
Hi everyone. Skadi Uyukat Usauk Autumn Jules Glekachenach. Dakla Shah Ayachat, Daislin Dach Ayachat, Goch Nach Sa Isati. Shinget Kuat Shinget Nochashaguk Kuatletuma. Cogne Usauk, Connie Jules Glekachenach, Achlich. Kashtach Kla, you do a selk, mini jewels, glay kachenach, and achlit do kla, sky u, you do salgoon, Mary Graphy jewels, glay kachenach. So I just said my Tlingit name is Sky to U, my English name is Autumn Jewels. I am from the Teslin Tlingit Council First Nations. I'm a woman of the Eagle Clan. I am Wolf Moiety. I'm also a part of the Yukon First Nations Climate Action Fellowship. but I also work for my First Nations as a community arts and events coordinator. I just said it in my introduction that I'm learning my Indigenous language. My mom is one of my teachers, and her Tlingit name is Kagane, and her English name is Connie Jules. My grandma's Tlingit name is Kashtak Claw, and her English name is Minnie Jules. And then my great grandma, who I'm named after, her Tlingit name is Skyda'u, and her English name is Minnie Jules, or Mary Gaffey Jules, sorry. And I just do that short introduction just to honor them, because they're the reason I'm here today. So, thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Autumn, for that. Donna, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Donna Hope. I'm from the First Nation of Notjanagdun. I am a citizen, Crow, and my official title for my current position is Alexco Mining Liaison, but I also am NND's water specialist, and do anything to do with water gets passed on to me. We're working on water strategy and water budgets for some areas, some watersheds within our traditional territory, and we'll continue until we're finished our whole traditional territory. Thanks for inviting us.
Wow, that's great. Such interesting work that you're undertaking, Donna. That's great. Thank you. Jen, would you like to introduce yourself? Jen from Aspen?
Jen, are you there? Oh, she might have stepped away for a minute.
Okay. That's
no,
okay.
sorry. Hi, I'm Jen from Aspen. I'm in Treaty 6 territory in Saskatchewan.
Great, thank you. Susan, would you like to go next?
Good morning, Susan Barnes. I work for the infrastructure unit at AFN, and I am the finance and administration officer. And I also work with projects and the water team very closely. So I've been working on the water engagements and water projects for 2 years now. So I'm really interested to hear the input you all have, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Melissa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, Melissa McKelvey, your friendly neighborhood note taker, former AFN staffer. It's nice to see a lot of old friends and familiar names. Look forward to working with you all.
Thank you, Melissa. Dustin, would you like to go next?
Hi there, my name is Dustin McKenzie Hubbard. I'm a citizen of Champaign-Asia, Crow Clan. I am with the Youth Climate Lab, First Nations, and I'm hoping to get more involved with everything and learn a lot more, because I was very disconnected as a youth, and I'm hoping to take what I learned and pass it on to my friends in my community and hopefully make some change. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dustin. And Nika, would you like to go next?
Kame good morning. My name is Nika Silverfox Young. I am a Northern Shoshone woman from Little Salmon Carmacks First Nations, and I am a part of the Wolf Clan. I am here today because I'm very passionate about our Yukon River salmon species, and water goes with salmon. So I'm very interested to be here, a part of this talk, and I'm a little bit upset I missed yesterday, but very excited about this morning. Masi, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nika. And Evan, I'll give you the opportunity too, if you wanted to do another quick introduction.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'm from Prince Albert, also in Treaty 6 territory. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here today and working with you guys on this.
Thank you, Evan. And I'm really excited to be with you today as well too. Many years ago, I actually, when I was 16, I actually lived in the Yukon for 2 months while I worked there. I worked at the Gold Panna restaurant in Carmacks. So I've always had a real heart felt a lot of warm feelings for your territory. It's so beautiful there, and I really valued the time that I spent in the north. So with that said, we're going to get started. So right now we have a presentation coming up. Bing, would you like to provide the overview presentation from the AFN? You're on mute.
Unmute me. Sure, I can start, Amy. Provide some background, context. I guess there's a flashback. Current status of Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act. You can go to the next slide. So those of you who have been following this has been going on for quite some time. The Canada developed a Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act, and it was put into force November 2013, full 8 years ago. Regulations have not yet been developed. It was created and brought into force without consultation. And despite extensive First Nations resistance and challenges, they pushed it ahead and introduced it through the Senate. And why they did that was any bills introduced to the Senate do not require any identification of resources to implement that act. One of the major objections by First Nation organizations was, first of all, there was no consultation. It did not respect First Nations water rights, nor did it identify any resources to implement the act. And that was the really bad way of introducing an act without saying we're going to be introducing regulations, but we're not providing you with any new money to be able to implement those. Engagements for modification of the Safe Drinking Water Act by ISK, INAC at that time, and ANSI at some point too, began in mid-June 2017 and proceeded until September 2017, despite calls for those engagements to cease by First Nations. And part of that was putting consultation documents on their website. And we know we don't consult by internet. So it didn't matter to them, they put them out, and we believe, I think they got 2 responses, one of which was looking for more information documents. So very clear to them that that is not how you consult with First Nations through the internet. Federal government made clear commitments to ensure First Nations have equity with non-First Nations in terms of water quality standards and equity in water access. In other words, they keep pushing this comparability idea. And yet, let's look at where we are today. We're certainly not comparable. Many First Nations are not comparable to water which is available to their neighbors. 2017, 2018, they have now acknowledged that the First Nations-led process to deal with the current legislation is needed. And that is really thanks to your support, to your leadership support, getting together and making objections to our Safe Drinking Water Act that we had no input into. So part of the work that we do and the mandates that we get mandates and direction from AFN resolutions. And that is how we get our working orders, I guess, to do the work that we do. In that time, 2017, 2018, 4 resolutions were passed on safe drinking water, and there's been many of those who really follow our AFN resolutions website will see many resolutions going back to 2006. So it was water-related matters in 2017, 2018, reflecting substantial results of sustained First Nations advocacy, which shifted the approach of the federal government on the Safe Drinking Water Act. Resolution 26, 2017, Safe Drinking Water First Nations Act repeated the call for repeal of the Safe Drinking Water Act and immediate cessation of federal government's engagement sessions for amendments to the act. In other words, in spite of all this, the government still tried to insist to go out there and consult in their own views with other organizations, and further instead call for the federal government to develop in partnership with First Nations the next steps in engaging with the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act. Next slide. Other resolutions, Resolution 88, 2017, First Nations-led engagement process for safe drinking water legislation directed the AFN to establish a joint working group comprised of AFN Chiefs Committee on Housing and Infrastructure, their regional technicians, federal representatives, legal counsel for AFN, and the federal government and other experts as necessary to co-develop a draft framework for new legislation. So Resolution 88, 2017 gave us the mandate to start developing how this framework, how this instrument will work in terms of working with Canada on developing a new legislation. And it's good to hear our federal partners now talking about repeal of the legislation. Before they used to say, yeah, we'll repeal, replace it, maybe we'll consider some amendments to it as part of that process. That is not the point. So the Resolution 1, 2018 First Nations-led process to develop new federal safe drinking water legislation took this process even further and mandated the AFN to immediately communicate to the federal government that in keeping with the government's commitments to reconciliation with First Nations, a joint legislative co-development process and mandate will proceed in full partnership with First Nations, including the development of a joint working group on safe drinking water for First Nations. So Resolution 1 to 2018 gave us further support to move forward on that. And again, the Chiefs Assembly gave us that support and endorsed our work to continue the work that we're doing. Support our response to Resolution 1, 2018 is to development of the Chiefs Committee on First Nations Safe Drinking Water legislation, drafting of First Nations Safe Drinking Water preliminary concepts, and we'll look at those in our discussions, presentation of the preliminary concepts to the Chiefs Assembly at the Vancouver AGA in 2018, and of that came the Resolution 26, 2018, support for First Nations Safe Drinking Water legislation preliminary concepts. So we presented those to the Chiefs Assembly and the mandate to use the preliminary concepts as a working document to support engagement. And you'll see those here today, and we'll go through them, and we're looking for additional comments, have a fulsome discussion on those. Directs the AFN to proceed with national engagement to develop new safe drinking water legislation. Directs the AFN to advocate for co-development of this legislation in a manner that affirms and ensures First Nations rights, interests, aspirations, inherent rights and laws, standards, guidelines, and processes are protected. So the big step forward there was in the initial round of consultations that Canada did. They said this legislation is not about rights. It had nothing to do with rights. It's all about health and safety. And they did not want to talk about or entertain anything about First Nations rights, water rights. So in 2019, we held engagements to further discuss key elements of the proposed repeal and replacement. And out of that came 5 basic areas to discuss: rights and responsibilities, water governance, transboundary issues, financing, and standards for the provision of water and sanitation. So next slide. So we've been here before. We were here 2019. Here, I'm thinking I'm sitting in a boardroom somewhere in Whitehorse, so I keep saying here. But anyway, we've been in Whitehorse before, and actually, we actually did another one session of engagements on operation and maintenance, which is intrinsically related to safe drinking water and what we talked about yesterday, long-term strategy on drinking water and wastewater. So they're all related. So in the short term, in the next 3 to 6 months, finalize the joint working group on safe drinking water terms of reference. And that's pretty well quite a ways underway. And we have legal advisors to work with us on that. And it's going back and forth with our counterparts at the ISC department. Initiate national, regionally led engagements process, and we've carried out with AFN support, regional water coordinator support, pre-engagements to refresh what happened and also to get some new information as we move forward on these current engagements. And to help explain some of the key topics, we had key expert videos prepared, and we'll see all of those today. Very helpful. The long term, 6 to 24 months, we're looking at 2022. Proceed with co-drafting of a draft framework based on all the input and advice, recommendations we've gotten over the past 2 years and this year, and continuing on with completing these across the country. Start drafting a draft framework. Present the draft framework to the Chiefs Assembly. And not sure, I don't think we're going to have something by July this year. And knowing that it's election year, sometimes not a lot of work gets done depending on how long the election takes. So I don't think we're really targeting July of this year to have a draft framework. Probably special Chiefs Assembly in December we're targeting at, and to have a draft legislation ready to be tabled in Parliament. Submission of a draft framework to Cabinet via another co-developed memo to Cabinet as a basis for drafting instructions. The new legislation to be passed by the government. Upon ratification, advocacy support for regional regulatory development to implement. So essentially, if we're following the legislative process, if it gets passed, and if all what we want to have in there stays there, the next step would be for regions to begin the regulatory development, to begin developing their own regulations. And obviously, we'll talk about it. There's got to be financial support to do all that. It's a very important part of it. Something we heard very clear when in our engagements, that all this work is useless if there's no resources to support it. So that's where I'm going to turn it over. If there's any questions, we can entertain them now, Amy, before we turn it over to Delaney.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions about the presentation that Bing just gave? I'm just making, there we go. Just want to make sure that everyone understands what the presentation was about. So the purpose of today, and I know that you had a session yesterday as well too, so you might have a bit of a broader concept about what the AFN is trying to do. They're looking for feedback from all the participants to be able to direct this co-drafting process. So by December of this year, 2021, they'd like to have a framework for what the First Nations safe water legislation should look like. And before we move on to the next portion, we are going to get into some dialogue regarding this framework and about the process moving forward. But before we go on to the next presentation by Delaney, are there any questions or comments that you want to bring forward at this time? Okay. If at any time you have any questions and there's someone speaking, you can always put them into the chat, and I will continue to read the comments into the chat and make sure that it gets brought up into the larger group. Okay. Delaney, did you want to? Oh, actually, we have some polling questions, right? So if you look over into the chat section, there's a link for a Menti poll. And the link is there, so you can click on the link, and then there's also the Mentimeter code that you'll have to put in as well there. So we have two questions that we are putting out to the group. How important is the repeal and replacement of the Act to you? So very important, somewhat important, neutral, or not important will be the first survey question. And the second one is, as we begin to push forward, push the new legislation forward, how quickly do you want to see new legislation being created in 2021, 2022, in the next 3 years? So I guess a couple of things to keep in mind as you're asking or answering some of these questions. One is that if you're not sure right now, you can always go back to these questions later and respond to them at a later time. Today, not in like 3 days from now, but anytime today, you can go back and respond to those questions. But I think one of the things that AFN is looking for direction on is the level of engagement and how quickly you need to see this legislation being enacted in order for it to make an impact in your community. So these are some things to keep in mind as you're answering the Menti questions and really helping them to create a framework and legislation that's going to positively impact the work that you're doing in the region. Is there any questions about these questions? Okay, so we're going to move forward to the first discussion topic, which is on rights and responsibilities. And Delaney, I will let you take over here.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Amy, and thanks to Bing for providing that context. My name is Delaney, and I'm a junior policy analyst at the Assembly of First Nations on Water. And I'm really happy that everyone took the time out of their day again today to join us to talk about this legislation. So we're just going to be going throughout the day the 6 key kind of discussion topics about it. So I'm going to break them down, and then we're going to have the opportunity to listen to an expert video about each of them, which kind of breaks it down further, and then have opportunity for discussion. And then we're going to do that again and again. So next slide, please. So as Bing mentioned, in 2019, the AFN carried out national engagement sessions on the repeal and replacement of the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act. So we came to all the regions with kind of different options for different components of the legislation. They were quite complex and involved quite a lot of like thought and discussion put into them. And we heard from First Nations their opinions on the different options presented, and we were advised by the Chiefs in Assembly to come back and kind of to re-engage with some further refined options to really ensure that we're getting consensus from all the regions. So the first topic that we're going to talk about today is rights and responsibilities. So as you can see here, in 2019, we came to the regions with 3 options to describe the rights and responsibilities aspect of this legislation. So option 1 was to not characterize Aboriginal rights to water in the legislation at all. And you can see the pros and cons to every option. And this was not favored in any region, so it was deemed not viable. So we're not even going to talk about this one anymore. We're going to focus on the other 2. So option 2 would be to characterize Crown and First Nations water rights directly in the legislation. So a pro to this option would be that it would provide some certainty to all parties and really provides a clear link between the rights and responsibilities of the Crown and First Nations, as well as a clear legal standard. However, a con to this option is that it could be complex to negotiate, particularly in the form of a statute with national reach. It really has also the potential for creating a strong legal precedent, as well as a high possibility of litigation, and risk creating a crystallization of rights and title that doesn't let them grow and adapt to new situations. So this approach would really make sure that like the rights are affirmed and enshrined in the legislation, but as it says in the con, it doesn't allow for a room for growth. So this option was favored by participants, but it was also established that it would be difficult to implement, which leads me to option 3, which would be to characterize Crown and First Nations rights in an aspirational form, such as in a preamble in the legislation with a strong non-derogation and non-abrogation of rights clause in the body of the legislation. So the pros to this approach would be that it would be easier to negotiate. It's non-binding, which has both pros and cons, as well as helps to create some guidance for all parties and clearly signals that First Nations do have and assert rights over the subject matter without committing nations to definitions for all time and purpose. So it really affirms those rights and says that First Nations have always had these rights, but it does allow for a bit more of a flexibility as the context does change. The cons to this is that it is non-binding, it's aspirational, and does leave some uncertainty as to powers and jurisdiction. And there's a possibility that it may be merely postponing difficult discussions about the provision of and ensuring safe drinking water so that it can be provided. So, but this option was favored by participants, but it was also agreed that it needs to be reworded. So next slide, please. So we're going to watch an expert video by Danica Littlechild, as well as Amanda Classing, that talks a bit further about the rights and responsibilities aspect. Sorry, can we just go back for one more second to that slide? Sorry, I just want to read through the discussion question just so everyone knows what we're going to talk about. And then the question that we're going to discuss and that we really want your input on is the new legislation should characterize First Nations water rights in direct or aspirational form, such as in a preamble, with a strong non-derogation and non-abrogation of rights clause in the body of legislation and no mention of Crown rights. So just keep this question in mind. We can talk about it a bit more after, but in the meantime, enjoy the following videos.
Wow, those videos were so impactful. So I just want to get some comments about what you thought of the videos so far, and also starting to get some feedback about what you think should be included in any new legislation or in a framework towards drafting the new legislation. What, in taking into consideration what you know as experts in this area in your region, what sorts of things could be considered moving forward in order for you to see your situation in the legislation or in the framework? What sorts of things can you direct AFN to include going forward? And I hope that you don't mind. I'm just going to call on some people. I know, Elder Hume, that you've done quite a bit of work in water. Do you mind sharing some of your thoughts on what we've seen so far and what kind of suggestions you can provide to the AFN? Oh, you're on mute.
There, how's that? I think the one area that I spoke on yesterday was the safety. And I think when I look at safety, there's a lot of issues and concerns with that is if, you know, you have a lot of people, you know, that are staying in homes, you have relatives, you have almost your whole family. And I think, you know, if a fire broke out and your family is lost because of lack of water, lack of sprinkling systems, lack of fire hydrants outside, lack of, you know, all of this here carries a huge impact. And, you know, you could lose a family, which we've already had happen in a few of the remote areas. And this is areas, you know, that we do have a fire engine within our community, but it's parked outside. And, you know, in this cold weather, you'll never ever get it started by the time you got everything going on it. And have another fire engine driving 20 miles, you know, you're going to lose your house. You possibly lose your family. And during the cold spell, you know, people do have a tendency of, families do have a tendency of moving into one another's homes because of the freezing temperatures. And I think, you know, the big concern, like I say, is probably going to be the safety of families and the safety of the water supply. And we have to have communities, fire hydrants, all of this infrastructure put into place in order to insure your home properly. Right now, because they're in the community that I stay in, you cannot buy insurance on your house. So all your contents are lost. And we have to start looking forward to some source of water system where we can place our fire hydrants, place our forestry equipment, all of this into one area and live safely, especially in the smaller communities. Whereas, you know, you drive 20 miles down the road and they have fire hydrants, they have all of this set into place. And this is a non-First Nations community. So, you know, why can't it happen with First Nations communities? Why can't this infrastructure be put into place? These are questions, you know, that concern me, and I think we really need to step forward and, you know, how can they do it and we can't? And where's the money supposedly going to come from? As you know, the government has held us back for many, many years. They're still doing this and not providing us any support. I mean, they've sent us through residential school. They've taken our children away. They probably put us back 30, 40 years behind anybody else. They've taken our gold out of our country. They've done all of this, you know, they've contaminated our water source. Now things are starting to spring back into place. So let's look at getting more dollars into place, because water, as you know, is very, very important. And the one that I'm concerned with is the safety of our families and of our children. Thank you.
Great comments. Thank you. So it is, I agree that water is really just about more than access. It's about community well-being, right? It's about having a space and a place to be able to ensure that all community members are living well and have access to safety and a safe place to flourish. Is it safe to say that you, I heard your comment about the resource development in the area and not having parity with other towns within the region as well too. So that definitely is something, having the resources available in order to make sure that you're on par with other towns is important. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and like I say, you know, with the government putting us back 40, 50 years, taking our children away, putting us through residential school, putting us on reserves, not being able to prosper in mining, any of this stuff, we were kind of put aside. And now that all the resources have left our country, they're starting to say, well, there was no reserves, there was no, none of these things that occurred. And, where do you trust government, after what they've done to you? And I think, it's time that we put ourselves into the monopoly game too, and started saying, okay, we're going to do what we need to do to get ourselves ahead of everybody else. Because right now, with all the minerals taken out of the country, I mean, what's going to be here to hold our children in? Where are they going to make the money from? And these are the questions that I ask as an elder, is what is left for our children after all the resources are taken away? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Autumn or Dustin or Nika, did you have any other comments that you would like to provide regarding the characterization of First Nations rights? And I know that in the presentation, there was discussion about the federal government not wanting to recognize the rights. But as we saw in the video from the human rights video, that there really is a human rights piece to this. I'm wondering if Autumn or Dustin or Nika, you have any other comments that you want to share regarding what should be included in moving forward. Nika, are you there?
Hi, yes. I'm still learning, and I really wanted to spend a lot of this just listening, but I do want to add a comment that watching the video, it was very emotional watching the family have to wash their baby bottles or using a bottle of water to brush their teeth. In my home community of Carmacks, we have very bad drinking water. I brushed my teeth at my brother's house and I got H. pylori, and that was like 2.5 years ago. And I'm still dealing with the issues of my body. I have regular stomach cramps. And for years, I didn't know what it was. My brother had it, my niece had it, my family had it. Like all of us just were always sick and always tired. And then finally learning a little bit more about it, it was very eye-opening to learn that it was so prevalent in our community. And I want to be a part of the change for it. I don't know what that means, but I definitely want to be a part of that. And I just wanted to comment on that it really did. That was emotional seeing, and especially when they said that for First Nations peoples or for people on reservations, that they don't have clean drinking water. I guess I just, my one main question was, what does that mean for Yukon First Nations? Because we aren't on reserve, we have our own self-governments. I'm just a little bit curious if somebody could answer that question for me. What would that mean for us as Yukoners or as Yukon First Nations compared to, say, people who live in on treaty lands? Thank you.
I'll just make one comment and then I'll look to either Bing or Delaney to respond to that. But I think that Nika, bringing up these questions is really great because it's going to provide some direction to the AFN to make sure as the process is moving forward that they're able to address some of these concerns that you have. And also I want to comment that I think that there is a lot of information, and I totally understand about wanting to learn more, but also your input is really valuable in this session. So don't ever feel like you need to be any kind of expert. Your opinion is always valued here, and we'll be able to take whatever you say and use it to move forward. So please don't feel nervous about responding. So thank you for providing your comments. And I'll just look to Bing now to maybe respond to that.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you, Autumn. You really brought up the point here that what we want to hear from you, that situations are different from south of 60 that we're used to. And also understanding that you have the self-governing First Nations here, and that our knowledge of the government's first round of consultations, I guess you might call it, they had delineated groups that they would work with. And YUKON, NWT, and I believe Atlantic region were the ones when what they called the first phase. And we later found out, saying, they told us, well, don't worry about YUKON, don't worry about NWT. We've had agreements with them saying that they're going to leave everything to YUKON territorial government to look after your water, look after the water. Same with the NWT, saying the NWT government of Northwest Territories would look after that. But when we came around, we heard, as we're hearing today, what protection is there for members to be protected against H. pylori. We heard that a long time ago. That is a real problem up in your territory. What protections do you have from YUKON territorial government to do that? Elder Hume talked about comparability. Why don't you have the same protections as municipalities in the Yukon? And this really kind of belies a little bit of our short of knowledge of how things are in Yukon, and this is why we're here. We know that you have a self-governing agreement. We're not too clear. I think we heard a little bit about it when we were here for the O&M operation maintenance engagement, saying, well, we're in the process of renegotiating our agreements, arrangements, and so we kind of stepped back. So, but still went through the process of listening to people that were in the room. But one thing we did take away from was that if other First Nations are getting something better, we want that too. So in other words, they don't want to be left out of any agreement, any announcements, funding agreements, or legislation. So this is basically one of the things we want to hear from you. How does what's happening in the rest of the country, where we're working very hard, as we did in the opening statements, of developing a draft framework with First Nations, regardless of where they are. How do you see yourself involved with that? Yesterday, we talked about long-term drinking water strategy. We heard other NWT that First Nations south of 60 get all the money. And part of that, our understanding is how do you get your resources, and how do you want to be part of that long-term drinking water strategy, water and wastewater strategy? So part of our engagements here has been to get more understanding of situations in Yukon territory and NWT, somewhat different between the two also. So ultimately, you pose a very good question, is how do you want to be involved? And I think there's a question yesterday about how do you want to be engaged? I think there's the same question here. How do you want to contribute to the development of a new First Nations-led safe drinking water legislation? So that's I'd like to elaborate that. Really, we're obviously learning, and I really appreciate going out and visit to these engagements. I'm always learning something different. And so I hope that I hope that helps and understand why we're here, why we want to hear from you, why we want to urge you to be open. As Amy says, don't be shy to ask questions or put forward ideas on how things should work. You've been to Vancouver, you've been to Toronto, you've seen other First Nations engagements, you've seen what they get, what's available. Do you have the same thing? Do you have the same thing as municipalities? We need to push for comparability within this legislation. And part of the discussion will be how that is ensured, can be ensured within the legislation in terms of resources. Something to think about. So hope that helps, Autumn. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Bing. Was there any other questions about what was just discussed? I know that not everyone is comfortable with speaking in public. So what I'm going to suggest is, and bear with me because I'm old, but this is the thing that my daughter says all the time now when she watches YouTube. Oh, so before I go on, Autumn has a question. Yeah, Autumn, did you want to say something?
Yeah, not so much more as a question, just maybe as like, I just kind of wanted to share like a little story. And I really connected with the first video that was played because I do think water has a spirit and it has a personhood. As a lot of our oral stories have like said in the past, they all have different teachings. And that's always one that has come up time and time again, is the power and the strength and what water can do. And it speaks to kind of the personhood of it. And I just kind of thought that a nice thing to connect with not just youth, but I think leadership and elders, if it's possible, to go on like a journey on the water. Because I have a paddleboard and I make sure to like go out to the water and pay my respect to the water. And it's nothing, it feels like your ancestors are with you. It feels like you're being guided by your ancestors. And I'm currently learning my Indigenous language, and it's like the language just comes to me out there. So that was like my recommendation, that everybody should, like, whatever's closest to you, but even as one to like AFN plan something that like we could all go on like a journey together, canoe or whatever, because that land water connection, it can't just be spoken about, you know, it needs to be practiced as well. And you could really feel the power of the water, and it creates opportunities where you can connect with the communities that you're speaking about as well. And yeah, so that's just what I wanted to share. So thank you.
Thank you, Autumn. That's really great feedback. I really appreciate that. And before you go off, just want to do a bit of a clarification. Do you think that that there's a disconnect from water when there are like infrastructure pieces? Like, do you think that there's still a connection to water through public infrastructure, or do you think there's a disconnection through water? And do you actually need to get out onto the land in order to keep that connection?
So I think it's all about balance. I think you need a little bit of both. You need a bit of the traditional knowledge, a bit of the spirit, but you also need the other side of things. You need the legislature, you need the law to protect because otherwise, if there was nothing put in place, people could do whatever they wanted, and there would be no structure to it. So I feel like in this time and era, we do need both to move forward. We need the science as much as, you know, we need the traditional knowledge. But I think something important to remember, that Indigenous law is law as well, right? And we need to treat it so, because we've had clan structures and protocols and values put in place for millennia, and to utilize that moving forward. And I think that was spoken about in the video as well. And so I just want to echo that. Thank you.
Yes, that's great. I agree with you. And there's that sense of responsibility, I believe, that comes with that within that Indigenous law, like sense of responsibility from individuals to protect that spirit within the water, right? Would you agree with that as well? That's great. Yeah.
Yes, I do agree with that. Sorry, having technical difficulties here.
Sorry. Yeah, so we will have a bit of a break now, but like, as I was saying before, if there's any other comments that's coming up, you want to include anything into the chat section, please provide it there. Emily has provided a nice link to the YUKON Water Strategy 5-year report. So for those looking for more information, like Nika and Dustin, feel free to grab that report as well too. As I was saying earlier, my daughter always says this as she's watching her YouTube videos and she's pretending to be a YouTuber. Put your comments below. She always talks about merch too, which we don't have any merch, not yet. Maybe we can get some merch, but please feel free to engage in that chat section as well too, if you're not really comfortable with speaking out loud. We're really looking forward to getting your comments back on this. We will take a short break. If you have a bit of time, maybe check out that Menti site. There are a few questions and polls that are on that site if you want to add your suggestions there as well too. So we're going to take about a 5-minute break. If you want to grab some water, have something to drink, and then come right back and we'll get right back into it. Yeah, so these are the questions that we had posted earlier. So this one is related to the topic that we were just talking about the characterization of water rights. And I see that there's been a lot of responses so far, but if you're a little bit confused about what it means, what non-derogation and non-abrogation means, it essentially just means that any legislation should not extinguish any other First Nations rights. Or compromise any work that's being done in other areas of rights. So just to have a bit of an explanation about that. And as we have heard in some situations, that there are a lot of people that are here to learn a little bit more about the First Nations legislation, the safe drinking water legislation. So if at any point in time you want to provide some additional comments about these polls, please do so in the chat box as well too. So that's great. Thank you, Jen. Oh, this was one that I was really interested in, and within the Mentimeter, you can provide some feedback there as well too about the question here was, what are your biggest concerns regarding the inclusion of water rights in the new legislation? So traditional use is one response. Feel free to add anything that you want to see in any kind of legislation or framework moving forward. So I think that one, the comment that was made about making the connection to the water was really important. And anything you think that safety was important, parity, as we had heard from Elder Hume, is also important. So anything that you can share with us to be able to capture in a go forward plan will be very helpful. Thank you, Jen. I think we can get back to the presentation now. So the next topic of discussion we have is water governance. And Delaney, are you providing the commentary on that?
Yes, I am. Yeah, so now we're going to be talking about water governance, just as what Amy was saying. So we're going to go through the options again. And I just want to say to everyone, even if you're not super familiar with like this legislation or kind of the legislative process in general, that's totally fine. In fact, it's kind of a better perspective to come to this discussion with kind of having new ideas, because I think I can speak for myself and Big, we've been at this for a while. So it's definitely, we're super eager to hear new points of view as well. So I just wanted to say that, and feel free to ask any questions if you have any. So we'll move into the options for water governance now. Next slide, please. Again, so yeah, we're going to go through these 4 options. I'll just start by noting that option number 4, to not engage the water governance arrangements at all in this legislation, was not favored in any region. So we've crossed this one out as this one's not viable. So we're going to be focusing on these other 3 options. So option 1 is to create a water governance approach and structure, i.e. something like a First Nations Water Commission, directly in the legislation. So the pros to this approach is that it would provide certainty and clarity to all parties. It could create or improve First Nations institutional capacity. It can be structured to support local, regional, and national approaches and ensure safe drinking water is in the hands of First Nations. A con to this approach is that if improperly created, it may restrict flexibility and local innovative approaches, and it may be prejudicial to First Nations existing structures and some of the work in progress that's already ongoing in your region, for example. So the feedback we heard from this is consider blending this with option 2. So option 2 is to create a high level approach and structure for First Nations water governance to be able to let it grow organically at the national level using a First Nations Water Commission. So this would, again, balances certainty and clarity with options to evolve organically. So it's not set in stone and it can change with the context and depending on kind of the regional issues as well, and allows some national level governance with room for local approaches and also could improve capacity. The con to this approach is that it might create a centralized system that some nations or regions don't want and may be difficult to negotiate and could have strong opposition from provincial and territorial governments as well. So it needs to be approached carefully to ensure that any delegation of authority to a centralized commission is not used to undercut the Crown's fiduciary responsibilities, like what was done in the actual Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act in the first place. We want to avoid that at all costs. And another con is it could take inherent jurisdiction and authority from individual nations or to divert funding from First Nations to a commission like this. So that's some issues we need to be aware of in order to avoid that. So the feedback we received on this is consider blending that with option 1 to create a blended option. And then option 3 was to create an opt-in approach to exercising water governance. So this really allows for local variability in terms of readiness of First Nations. So each individual nation can decide at what point, if at all, they want to join this governance institution. But a con to this approach is that it could create a patchwork of systems and approaches. So this option was somewhat favored. So now we're going to go into a video by one of our legal advisors, Marilyn Fair, who's going to really give a good breakdown of kind of all of these potential options. And the question for discussion to consider is that the new legislation should create a high-level approach and structure for First Nations water governance with an opt-in approach to be considered, and that a First Nations Water Commission should be explored. Thank you.
That was great. I really enjoyed that video. One of the things that stuck out for me was her comments at the very end that talked about the First Nations legislation doesn't give you the rights. The rights existed before, right? The rights come from creator. They were there before Canada was even established, that the rights have been there for longer than the government institution has been there itself. I want to have a bit of a discussion about this, but I think that before we do, I just want to get some feedback on what you think. So if you can do a little hand raise, I'll ask you some questions and just do a little hand raise in the reaction section. So if you go down to the bottom, there's a little note that says reactions, and you can give a thumbs up if you agree with this or not. So she talked about 3 different hows, and the first one was status quo. Does anyone agree with status quo? Is there anyone that thinks that things should just stay the way that they are right now? No one thinks status quo is the way to go. What about cooperative governance? So cooperative governance was about finding the government and the First Nations working together and then deciding who was going to do what. Was there anyone that, raise your hand if you think that cooperative governance is the way to go? Okay, was there anyone that thinks that collaborative? So collaborative was forming a whole new institution together. Oh, sorry, can we put the video or the screenshot down so I can see the, yeah. Great, so I got one yes here, so that's great feedback. Is there anyone else that thinks collaborative is the way to go? Nika, do you want to maybe speak to that a little bit? Why you think that that's the way to go? Autumn as well. What do you think are some of the positives that could come out of that?
Just to really touch on what Autumn mentioned, Indigenous law is law. During our fellowship, we've been speaking a lot with a lovely woman who is from New Zealand. She was a part of the legal personalityhood of their waters and their forests there. Just speaking on that, just really what Autumn mentioned before, I really like what she said is Indigenous law is law. So having the collaborative government where we create the rules and we work together for that, I think that would be beneficial more for maybe for us as a territorial First Nation, since we are self-governing already. I'm not sure. Unfortunately, I don't know enough about the treaties or on other First Nations south of 60 to really talk about that. But I feel for the Yukon government or for the territorial First Nations, collaborative government would probably be the way to go towards that.
Great, thank you. Autumn, I had also seen your hand up as well too. Do you have any comments you want to make on that?
Yeah, so I was just thinking in regards to that, yeah, like moving forward, that we have to honor both sides, right? And that's I think through a collaboration, because we've done the where we each make our own rules and we try to work together, and then we have that big issue of communication, right? And then so it's, I think, to just break down those silos. I like how she referred to them as silos, because you are in your own category, and it's very hard to collaborate when you're kind of doing your own thing. But I just try to think about like all perspectives, and I know not all First Nations and Indigenous peoples in Canada are under Assembly of First Nations. So to think about them as well, that I think if we were to doing a collaborative, that would give more people voices to work on like the bigger spectrum, because we each have different individual needs when it comes to each First Nation and Indigenous community. So being able to honor that, I think best, to maybe bring more people in to work together, it would have to be a collaborative to move forward. Because it's not working. What we're doing right now, the status quo isn't working. And I don't think the silos are working very well either, because there's no room for collaboration. And then there's always the big issue of communication. So thank you.
That's great, thank you. So I think one of the interesting things, and forgive me because I'm not very aware of how it works in the Yukon, but from what I understand, you have co-management agreements there, right? Is there anything that you can kind of provide guidance on how that's working in the Yukon, and how some learned lessons that could be provided for the legislation and the framework going forward? What sorts of things can you take away from your co-management relationships now that could be of benefit to this process?
I know I don't work too hand in hand with the Lands and Resources Department here in Tasmania Council, but I just practice my own by going out on the land and spending a good majority of my time on the land, because I feel like the best way is through connecting. But I know that we do within our community that we we work with like YESAB. I know that there's YESAB within our community, and that's a different organization, but they work hand in hand, but they make recommendations. They do research and they make recommendations to our First Nations, and then our First Nations decides if they want to use it or not use it. So sometimes that might not work out, and sometimes, because it might be a lot of work put in, and sometimes it could be denied just due to the feeling of the First Nations. So I know that I think they're also, but we do, I think what I've seen success in the co-partnership is through partnerships with other First Nations and the Land Guardians program. I know that we have from the Lower Post First Nations and Atlan as well, they will send their land guardians here to meet with ours, and they share a lot of resources and knowledge exchanges. So it can work in some instances, but I feel like moving forward to be all on the kind of the same page would be a little bit better time wise too, because you waste a lot of time when sometimes you put in a lot of work to something and it just gets denied. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you for that feedback. Is there any other feedback regarding the how? So let's go on to the other question she was talking about, is that what would be the preferred route? First Nations own water authority, and I think Autumn kind of mentioned that now, is that sometimes it can be a little bit taxing on capacity in communities. What are your thoughts on every First Nation having their own water authority? Again, we'll do a little reaction. If you think it's a good idea, do your thumbs up and their reactions. No, not a good idea. What about a regional approach? In the video, she was talking about a regional approach, so that, and again, you can set it up per your own territory, whether that's through provincial or territorial boundaries, or maybe it's a nation approach or a watershed. Actually, I'd be really interested to know what your thoughts on our watershed. Do you think a watershed approach to regulation and law would be a good idea? Thumbs up or thumbs down? I think there's a thumbs down. Or I think you can press the no button. Yes or no? Thumbs up, great. I can see some thumbs up, thumbs up. I like that idea too. That would be interesting. Does anyone want to share any comments about their thoughts on a watershed approach? Nika, you want to have any thoughts on that?
Just to base, just on the watershed approach, I think it would be really important that just all of us as First Nations, I'm a Northern Shoshone woman, and so I know there's 4 other Northern Shoshones in the community in the Yukon, so it'd be nice to have all of us kind of band together towards more steps of that. I'm a little unsure. I guess at this point, I would just like to listen more than I speak. My apologies.
No, that's okay. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think it's really important to get a lot of ideas going, as Delaney was saying earlier. I think sometimes when you're so focused in on it for so long, it's nice to kind of have some fresh ideas about things to examine. So we're just trying to have some discussion here. So again, I don't mean to put anybody on the spot. And then also we had, so what are your thoughts on the last spot that she was, or the last structure she was talking about having the local and regional and national level, where the national level would look at big picture? And by the sounds of it, she didn't quite get into detail, but I'm assuming that national would look at big picture and maybe local would look at more like operational and grassroots operations of how that's being rolled out in the communities. Thumbs up or thumbs down, yes or no, on what you think about that approach?
And just so everybody remembers, it's down at the bottom of Zoom in the reactions panel. And so you can click on that and click the thumbs up or thumbs down. And then I believe on the phone, it's the little 3 dots that says more. You can click on that and find the reactions.
Amy, could you repeat that again? Sorry, do you mind?
No, not at all, sorry. So in the video, she was talking about the last approach was to have a local, a regional, and a national level collaboration. So where the national level would be looking at more of the bigger picture, high level structures. So the national would look at potentially basic standards, high level principles, looking at accessing technology and setting standards of what is safe and what safe water should look like. And then regional would maybe at that point be looking at things that are specific to any territorial or provincial landscape, right? And then local would be actually putting that into place in the actual community. So there's decision making at all 3 levels, but there should also be like a collaborative approach to that. So just any reaction to that would be valuable. So thumbs up, thumbs down. I think there's also a maybe button on there. Some thumbs up would be a good idea. We got 3 thumbs up. Is there any comments or questions on that approach?
Amy, I realized Donna just joined back with us. Hi, Donna. Donna, we're talking about governance structures for, I don't know, Amy, if you want to just give a really quick.
No, that's for sure. Yeah, so we're talking about, we just finished watching a video, and I believe, Donna, if you missed anything, Evan, correct me if I'm wrong, are the videos on the AFN water site?
No, they're not on there.
Okay, all right. So we can, we just finished watching some videos from some experts that AFN often uses regarding water and water rights. So the last video that we watched was having to do with creating a high-level approach and structure to water governance. And her message in there was that water governance is really about decision-making, and how at a governance level, the bodies are responsible for putting in a vision and principles, and making the decisions of what safe drinking water should look like. It's not so much about operations. Operations is operations. So this question is, the question that we're on right now is that in terms of a governance structure, should there be an entity that looks at local, regional, and national level governance structures, so that there's different responsibilities for different levels? And one of the questions we had talked about earlier was that the opportunities for collaboration. So something like this could provide more opportunities for collaboration. There are some challenges. There's just a lot of people to try to coordinate, but on the flip side, there's pros and cons to everything. So we're just trying to get a bit of feedback about what some ideas were. So if you think that a local, regional, and national level approach could be something to examine, if you just want to either give your thoughts on that or provide a reaction in the bottom, that'd be really helpful for us. I know that in your introduction, you talked about doing a lot of work in water in your area. So if you have any thoughts on that, we'd welcome those comments as well too.
Well, I guess in regards to some of the work that we're doing, our land claims have been settled since 1993. And since 1994, we've requested land use planning. It's in our final agreement. We're still waiting for land use planning. While our traditional territory continues to get chopped up, death by 1,000 cuts, mining, agriculture, even trapping, all of these impact First Nation, how we do things on the land and stuff. And we really noticed that. And one of the obligations that's in our final agreement, we have Chapter 14, and really it provides the Yukon to have the right to water, which remains substantially unaltered as to quantity, quality, and rate of flow, including seasonal rate of flow on, flowing through, or adjacent to our settlement lands. And it just came to us that with so much, the understanding of water should be as detailed as our bank accounts, and we're not there yet. We don't know how much water we have. We don't have an inventory of it. We don't do a really good job of understanding the whole hydrological cycle and how it's all connected and how it really impacts our traditional uses and our values and the connections and common goals of those. So in absence of land use planning, we are hoping that we can use and learn how to use water, because no one owns water, and it's kind of the commonality. Water is the only thing that's left for us that's intact. It's not chopped up. So that becomes very important to us. No one owns water. Government doesn't own water. We're not allowed to own water. And we all need to drink. Water's life. And without it, we're all dust. So that's where we're trying to take the initiative to make sure that we do a better job of monitoring all of our lands, our settlement lands, our site specifics, in regards to the traditional uses, being able to drink water from our camps and stuff like that. So we're hoping that through developing a water strategy for our entire traditional territory and doing water budgets on smaller watersheds, that makes sense. It's a scale thing for the water budget that we're still trying to understand. At a bigger scale, there's just too much data to analyze and draw into that to understand what the watershed needs. So we're working in those scopes right now, and we're hoping that eventually this will come to a very tangible, measurable, that we can say that in this environmental, based on ecosystem services, based on traditional use, that watershed is full. And hopefully present limits and move things around. That's just how we did things traditionally, is we didn't stay in one place because we understood that we could kill things if we stayed in one place. Not only the environment around us, but our community, ourselves. We could eat ourselves out of house and home, and everything else gets impacted with that. So we understand that it's a huge, big task, and we've been working on it since 2018, trying to do a water budget and getting an understanding. We've shrunk our area down to a more manageable space now, and this season we're hoping to get a better understanding. But one thing I do know that we missed in the first couple years of the pilot project is what was brought into the conversation this morning is the actual spirit of water. And we're going to try to include those aspects moving forward, and just grow our water monitoring program, start developing our water strategy for the entire traditional territory based on our settlement lands and our traditional uses, and start doing budgets to understand how much water we have, how much water we're using, and if we're robbing from other places. Thanks for listening.
That is great. Sounds like such interesting work that you're doing. I'm actually a planner by schooling. So when you talk about land use planning, my heart gets a little bit excited about that. But one of the other questions that we had talked about earlier was having water, like a water authority or water governance set up on watersheds. And it sounds like that's something that you're already looking at.
Very, very interested in and learning more of how we can do that, and making sure that all of our common goals are met. I think the more that we meet on common goals for First Nation uses and other governmental uses, the better that we can work collaboratively to ensure that everyone's needs and interests are met, especially when it comes to ecosystem services. If we start breaking those down, we're in big trouble, because water's life, and without it, we're dust.
Yeah, I have two questions for you. One is, so in the work that you're doing, is there any kind of carrying capacity? Like, it sounds like you're kind of examining that carrying capacity of their watershed, right? Like how much load and how much development one watershed can handle. And then my second question is, can you just maybe elaborate a little bit more on what you mean when you say water budget?
So when I was taking my Bachelor of Science in, it's been a while now, I graduated it in 2013. I learned about, Ontario was doing actually a bigger project on water budgets. And there was a professor there, and I don't know if he's still there, but I'm still trying to get connections with it. They got an understanding of ecosystem needs, like what soils needs, what specific trees need, all those aspects within that environmental platform. So we're starting to get an understanding of that too. I know that NND, and while we're doing our land claims and planning for some of our settlement blocks, we've actually got really deep into the detailing of that, of understanding what kind of soils are on that landscape, what kind of trees are on that landscape before any development happens. A lot of the things that we do is we want to regenerate and bring things back to what it was before they got there. And if we don't have an understanding of the baseline of what was there previously, including all these aspects of what kind of soils, are they healthy, the waters, the trees, even the aspects of wildlife and what exists there. I know it's a huge project, but I think that we're NND, we believe that water is going to be like the top aspect of how we manage things, because of it's a very finite chemistry balance that keeps water clean and allows us to do what we need to do with it, to keep ourselves healthy, to keep our environments healthy, and to make sure our industries get it too. Because we've always also said that too. NND is not against development or mining, but we want to see that it's done it properly in the best ways that it can, and regenerated and brought back to the best possible ways that we can to how it was before they started.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So it sounds like there has been a few comments about balancing science, traditional Western science, with ecological knowledge. And it sounds like you're really moving forward on that path. Sounds like you're doing a lot of really interesting work.
And we're just going to build on it as we go. We understand it's a huge undertaking, but you got to start somewhere.
That's great. I'm just going to open up. Is there any other questions from the participants, from either to AFN or any of the other delegates to Donna, because it sounds like she's also working in this area as well too. So I just wanted to see if there was any specific questions that anyone had. Bing?
I just want to relay something we heard at the other regions. I think it was NWT, of another organization. They have actually done a water balance exercise. In other words, looking at the watershed level, and similar to what Donna was talking about, looking at all the needs, where the water's going, where it's coming from, who needs it, what needs it. And a big part of it is the ecological needs of that water balance. So you can do that within the watershed, maybe a large watershed, or even a secondary watershed, tertiary watershed, to begin to understand how that works, and you start building it up, and you eventually get to a major watershed water balance. And how do you protect that? Because it's not coming from any other place, only within the watershed and from the sky, and that's it. And the ground,
That's important. And I think that, and maybe I'm going to ask another question, and again, give your reaction with a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Do you think that any kind of legislation or framework needs to be holistic? Like, I know that a lot of like, we'll say municipal structures really concentrate on the infrastructure. But do you think that there is a need to include source water protection in Safe Water Drinking Act? Thumbs up or thumbs down? Thumbs up. Got some thumbs up. Thumbs up. Thumbs up. Do you have anyone have any comments on that? Elder Hume, I saw you nodding. More thumbs up. Great. Do you have any comments that you want to include in your opinion on that? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, now we have it. Can you hear me? Okay, basically, it's a process right now that government is really stringent on doing, is putting in hydro dams where they're altering the rate of flow, the quality of the water, and actually the quantity. And basically, when they do put in a hydro site, it damages the stream flow below. And once you've tampered with the water source, it now becomes an engineered process. And when I say engineered, it's if they want to put more whitefish in the system, they do studies and they figure out why the whitefish is dying off. So they produce more whitefish. You know, you get it's an engineered process. And I think, you know, it's far beyond our means on how do we deal with a situation like this. You know, it's when it becomes an engineered process. And it's kind of a lifeline to the Yukon territory because government is saying it's our pet project. This is what finances the use of less diesel fuel, less operation of mechanical driven power hoses throughout the Yukon. So you're burning less diesel fuel. So, you know, the government turns around and puts that on you. And plus, you know, what's happening on the down portion riverside of the outflow is when you do open your governors on the generation side, you're actually putting more water into the system. And so therefore you're creating a new waterway that is more straightforward. It takes all the twists and turns out of the river system below. And so henceforth, there's less bank protection. There's there's a lot of icing that takes place. There's a lot of timber that's being taken out of the system and flowed downstream, and also you're losing your fish habitat. So this continues on, and the government says, well, we have that Yukon Territory Water Board. So when you look at the water board, you know, you have to sit down and say, well, which government are you actually working for? Is it the Conservative government, or is it the federal government, or is it the Liberal government, or whatever? You know, the governments change every 3 or 4 years. And so by the time you finish negotiating with one government, election year comes around, and you fall short again for another couple of years. So this gets passed on, similar to when you're negotiating land claims. You know, I started out with Champagne-Ajac as a counselor, and I spent 26 years as a counselor. Went through the land claims, went through the Water Management Act. All of these things were set in by the governments in power. And I think, you know, you have to look at the federal legislation that you know, does a lot of damage, and they turn around and turn this over to YTG and say, well, it's the government that you have to deal with now. So, you know, the buck keeps getting passed on, and eventually, you know, there's no money involved. So you're right back into the pitching the ball again. And I think, you know, we need to look at a different cooperation. We need to look at bringing in our own Waters Act for First Nations and use a lot of traditional history, you know, on how we protected the water, how we prayed with water, how our animals survived with water, how we appreciated all of this. You know, it comes back to that issue where everything is science. And I think we need to sit down and say, we have a traditional use of this water, and state your traditional uses and show this to government. And because, you know, when you look at the Fisheries Act, you look at almost any act that applies to water. It's important, you know, that we sit down and have our own act in place. And each community has a special assignment of developing their own act. And as Assembly of First Nations, there should be an act in place that involves all of the First Nations, all 600 First Nations, anybody that is near the water system. I know the story where my grandmother has told me once that she was relating to a story that was told to her probably by her great-great-grandmother, great-grandmothers, and this story has been passed on generation after generation. That the reason our people, she said, stay beside water now is a long time ago, this country, she said, dried up. And there was forest fires all over the country. And she said, our villages burnt up. We stayed in the timber where it was before houses were developed. We stayed in skin houses and teepees. And we had to run to the water, she says, so we could survive. Some people burnt up. And that's why, she says, now we stay close to water because it is sacred to us. It protected us. And it developed where our people now build close beside water, realizing this may occur again. And you can see what's happening now with climate change. Is this occurrence where you have beetle infestation developing all over the country? Your forest is dying off and it's drying up. And I think, you know, we have to listen to those traditional stories. But I'll stop there, and those are some of the issues that I have. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. So just picking up on a couple of things that you had mentioned, and just you can give me a thumbs up if you think I'm on track here. Do you think that a traditional value system of rights and responsibilities to water should supersede political aspirations? And yes, and everyone, yes, I'll get other thumbs up on that. Yes, great. And because what I was hearing you say was that the challenge becomes when you put something into place is that when the government changes, then the values change. But really the value has always stayed the same with the First Nation, right? The value has always been about the water and water being life. So that should, I think, you think that it's safe to say that that should be foundational in any work going forward? Yeah. And then the other thing, and I think that you could also tie that into, was the competition between water and industry, right? You were talking about the energy industry and how the hydro dams have taken precedence over natural flow of water and fisheries and things like that. So there has to be that balance and that precedence of valuing the water.
What I said there was it becomes then, once you put in a hydro dam, it's then becomes an engineered process. And we have to state that, you know, that as First Nations, we don't know how to deal with an engineered process.
Mm.
I mean, we look at a natural process.
That's very interesting. I like that perspective. That's great. Are there any other comments or questions? We are going to be taking a lunch break, so we'll come back at noon. And I just wanted to comment that Emily has put some really great resources in the comment in the chat section. So there's the one that I mentioned earlier about the 5-year Yukon water strategy. There's also one about the Peel watershed land use plan, and then a link to the YSAB, which was what Autumn was referring to. So if for anyone that was looking for some more resources, those are in the chat box there. And we'll take a bit of a break and come back and we'll pick up our discussion. So if you can be back at noon, 12 noon your time, we'll continue on. Thanks everyone. Have a great break.
Thanks everyone. Chat soon.
Thanks.
Okay, I guess we can get started again. If everyone's all right with that. Was there any questions from the beginning, the morning session, the beginning part of the session? Evan, did you just, can you also put the Menti link in the most recent comments, just in case you missed it or you haven't been able to participate yet? And Donna, I'm not sure if you saw it. The Menti polls are up. So if you just want to keep clicking on those links there, and we can take you to the Menti poll. Let's look at, before we get started into the afternoon session, let's look at what the responses were on the previous session. So the question was, do you agree that the new legislation should create a high-level approach and structure for First Nations water governance? Can we share that on the screen? Where's the Menti?
Yeah, Colin, can you share the Mentimeter?
Yeah, oh, so there's 4 responses. It's great. So everyone's in agreement that a high-level approach for water governance with an opt-in approach. And what was the next question? Was that specifically for the opt-in approach? Should governance pursue an opt-in approach? Okay. Oh, am I missing one? Who is that? Oh yeah, the water commission. So a water commission should be examined with a potential maybe. And then the last question is about the opt-in approach. Is that what I'm, yeah, there we go. Okay, interesting. If you want to share any comments about why you chose maybe for the opt-in approach, that would be really helpful for moving forward. Do you think that there just needs to be more information before there's any concrete responses given? Who would like to see more information before? If you can just give your thumbs up about who thinks there should be more information before you would be comfortable saying yes or no. Okay, all right, great. So the next topic of discussion we have is transboundary governance. And Delaney, are you going to be leading that for us again?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
All right, so now we're going to discuss our third topic of the day, transboundary governance. So next slide, please. So same as before, we're going to go through the 3 options that were presented to the regions in 2019 and then go through the pros and cons. So option 1 would be to confirm that the legislation supports First Nations exercising their jurisdiction and protect off-reserve source water through agreements made with other Crown governments. So the pros to this approach is that the agreements would provide sufficient mutually agreed clarity to ensure source waters are protected. So all parties involved would have a good understanding of this. Not defining First Nations jurisdiction, just acknowledging their power to make agreements with Crown governments. And this clause is also not in danger of federal overreach into provincial jurisdiction or territorial jurisdiction as well. A con to this approach is that agreement is not mandatory, and so it may be exceedingly difficult to negotiate with the oppositional provincial or territorial governments. So this approach was somewhat favored, but we're going to discuss option 2 as well, which was more favored. So option 2 would be to set out First Nations jurisdiction to protect source waters off reserve. So in this case, First Nations jurisdiction is acknowledged and implementable, and it avoids litigation to implement jurisdiction, as it's really clear right in the legislation from the get-go. A con to this approach is it's likely to be opposed by provinces and territories, and this provision would be seen as federal overreach without that provincial or territorial agreement. But this approach was the most favored, as it's a pretty strong approach. And then option 3 would be not acknowledging First Nation jurisdiction at all in the legislation, which is quite similar to the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act. So this is not favored in any region, and so it's not a viable option. So we're going to be focused on the other 2 options. But if we could go to the next slide, please. We're going to watch an expert video by Teresa McClenahan, who's a lawyer focusing on environmental and water law. And for discussion, the question that we're going to be considering is the new legislation should clearly set out First Nations jurisdiction to protect source waters off reserves. That's what we're going to be thinking about after this video. Thank you.
That's great. So I included the websites that she referenced in the video into the chat there, the SELAfoundation.ca and then SELA.ca, in case you're looking for any other information. So I'm going to refer back to the Menti poll, which was, the question is, do you agree that the new legislation should assert First Nations jurisdiction to protect source waters off reserve? And the answer is yes. Everyone agrees, yes, this should be protected. The next question is, should First Nations jurisdiction be pursued at all cost in legislation, despite limitations that may be imposed by provinces or territories? And again, the answer, oops, I think I'm scrolling too far here. The answer is yes. There we go. So that was the first question. Lots of yeses. Everyone's in agreement there. Great. Should be pursued at all costs. And then the final question, then there was a word bubble as well too, right? Can we see some of the words on the word bubble? What are your main concerns? Funding, ooh, interesting. Funding, interconnected, rights and responsibilities, and authority. So that's interesting. Does anyone want to share some of their thoughts that they were thinking about when they were writing in this word bubble? What are some of your concerns regarding interconnected? Who shared interconnected? Or funding? Who shared funding? I think there's probably always a concern with funding. Is it that there isn't going to be enough funding, or where the funding is going to come from? Is that what some of the concerns are?
I wrote that, and interestingly enough, it comes as a challenge getting funding for our traditional territory, we have asserted area into NWT as well, but we only have land claims settled on the Yukon side.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So in terms of funding, what becomes some of the concerns? Like, is there a lot of like reporting, or is that where the concern is, or there's not enough funding from one agency, or where do you think that your concerns mostly lie?
I guess it's just to do with the jurisdictional considerations, because we don't have land claims settled into NWT yet. We just have an asserted area. So it makes it challenging for us to get funding for that, to do monitoring that we need within our traditional territory on the NWT side.
Oh, I see. So again, going back to the point where the water doesn't recognize the boundaries or the regions, right? So how do you protect a full watershed when you have competing value systems between the two territories? Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Has there been any work into how to resolve that, or is you're still just, yeah, okay. Does anyone want to share their thoughts about authority? Who wrote authority? Does someone want to share their thoughts on who wrote authority?
Yeah, I can share quickly. It's Emily here. Yeah, I shared authority and rights and responsibilities. I guess like an example I was thinking of would be like the Yukon River, which we share with the Alaska side, and thinking about like the issue of salmon. So a lot of Yukon First Nations have like given up their traditional right to harvest salmon because of the returning spawning numbers being so low. So we have all of these, conservation efforts on our side and the Canadian side, but the same conservation practices are not being upheld on the United States side. So that's just an example, but there being like that difference in authority between like different countries, different governments, and also like the different rights and responsibilities of the citizens of those countries.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I think when you have the two territories or watershed in two different territories, there's usually some common connector there within two territories or two provinces or provinces and territories. But when you have the difference between two countries, there definitely is some challenges there in perspective, specifically with the previous government in the States had very different views, I think, that opposed a lot that was happening, what Canadian views are. So yeah, that definitely does become a concern, I guess, with transboundary jurisdiction. What about interconnected? Did somebody want to comment on what their concerns were regarding transboundary considerations and interconnected? Does that just kind of go back to what we were just discussing about it's all connected and it's hard to put boundaries on that? So maybe what I'll do is she made a comment. She commented a lot about Walkerton, and I just wanted to know, does everyone understand what that reference was? That we have some folks that are just learning about water. So if you can give me a thumbs up, we can maybe get no, people don't know what Walkerton was? Okay. So Walkerton, as she noted in 2000, Walkerton is a municipality in Ontario, and they had a massive E. coli outbreak in their municipality, where they had over 2,000 of their residents become sick, and six or seven, I think she commented seven of them had actually died because of contamination in their municipal water source. So because of Walkerton, this had really kind of contributed to a lot of discussions on water. putting in water safety and making sure that monitoring is happening and that there was proper standards put in place. And I think that it's really contributed to a larger conversation about water and jurisdiction and responsibility. And what it had turned out was that the water plant operator was found liable for work that was done or not done in relation to into the water system there. Does anyone else have any comment or information that they want to share in terms of water governance and safety in relation to Walkerton, or the other? She also commented on North Battleford, and anything. Is there any other comments that anyone wants to share about for information sharing purposes? So in terms of just going back again to, oh, was there a comment?
Yeah, it's Autumn here. Yeah, it's not more of a question, but more of a comment, more of a reflection that it's not, I guess in my travels, I got to experience what it means when you can't drink the water where you're at. Because I was in Cambodia, Phnom Penh for 4 months and having to buy bottled water. It just was like I kept cycling back in, right? You're contributing to this single-use plastics because you can't drink the water. And then there's this domino effect. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that when I came home, and I came right home to a 7th-gen student energy conference. So it was kind of like a full cycle, and I got to share my experience. And that's where I met people from across Turtle Island that they can't drink their water in their communities. And it was a lot of Indigenous communities that were on reserve that were experiencing that. So I guess it's just just to think about on an international scale as well, that we have all these Indigenous allies across the globe that we can work together in solidarity. You know, some people might be doing it differently elsewhere that might work better to reach more audiences, because I know that there definitely is that if we were to put out this document, it would be an umbrella for all, but there definitely would be holes in the umbrella because there are some Indigenous communities that don't fall under AFN. So just to think about them so they don't get left out in the big picture as well.
Mm-hmm. So just speaking to that, Autumn, do you have any ideas of how AFN could engage and make sure that they're capturing the voices of those First Nations that don't always participate in sessions like this?
I know, sorry, I would turn on my video right now, but my internet's not very good at home. When I'm back at the place I was using the internet, I'll turn it back on. But I think it starts with the youth. I think the new generation has a lot more of an open mind, and we really, I think it starts with the youth. If you work with the youth in those communities and be able to, I know that with my experience in doing work around the community, that in certain families where elders don't usually come to the events, I'll talk to their grandchildren, and their grandchildren will get them to come to events and be with them and sit with them because they'll be more comfortable with them. And I think that works the same with community wise as well, to maybe you start with the youth, and then the youth could bring an elder, and so on and so on. And you could start to really involve the whole community and work in kind of like an asset-based community development, you know, like everybody has their own strengths and to kind of utilize those.
Great, that's great feedback. And just building on what we were talking about when you were describing your experience in Cambodia, were you the one that put the interconnected on the word bubble? Is that where that came from?
No, sorry, that wasn't me, but I definitely would have put interconnected because I think it is important to be interconnected throughout all generations is why I would have put it, and be interconnected throughout the communities as well, through the communities and territorially, and then throughout Canada, provincially as well.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I was just thinking about when you were talking about your experience in Cambodia as being interconnected to how you were reliant on the single source plastic for your water, and how that contributes to other issues then, right? How the single source then contributes to waste and recycling in communities, and how it also then is taking like household finances, is referring it back to other areas like water, where they could be using that for other means as well too, right? So there really is that connection, that interconnectedness. Nika, did you have something that you wanted to share?
I did. So it was actually me that put interconnected. I was a little bit shy to admit that until I heard others speak. I just kind of feel like I put that on a whim, especially like watching that last video, I wrote down water respects no boundaries. And I really felt that was very important after everything that we just connected on. And then also just to play off of what Autumn mentioned and her traveling and learning what the values of water is. I backpacked through Australia for 1.5 years. And so water is very key in learning from the Aboriginal point of views in that sense. Water is life. Like, I really truly believe that. And after coming back to Canada and seeing kind of our situation, like meeting a lot of people, they would ask us, like, or they would ask me, you come from Northern Canada, like that's the land of lakes, you must have a lot of clean water. And it's like, was a bit embarrassing to always admit, like, actually, no, we don't. We have a poor situation. We have a poor handle on it. Especially talking with Australian Aboriginal people, they truly did get it. I didn't realize how bad of a situation it was there until I got there. That's something that they don't admit. That's kind of like Canada with our residential schools. It's like our best well-kept secret. So I feel a little more comfortable to admit I put interconnected on the map after listening to others speak. But yeah, I just wanted to input and just make that comment that it was me. So yeah, thanks guys.
That's great. Thanks for sharing. No, I'm really glad that you had put that on there, and it's really helpful, I think, to keep that in mind, right? Like you said, that the water knows no boundaries. So as much as people, we want to try to put a box around these things, nature's going to do what nature's going to do. So the water does not care about our boxes, does not care about our boundaries. So that was really helpful. Thank you. And just to reiterate, like I was saying earlier, please don't feel shy about putting your hand up or speaking. We're welcoming all voices. This is really going to contribute to better dialogue, a better approach for AFN to be able to continue their work forward. So as Bing was commenting in the presentation before, what will happen with this is that there'll be a report that's put together, and then it'll be shared with all the First Nations to be able to understand the approach going forward. And then they're looking to have the framework of what the actual legislation would look like for December of later this year. So there's still quite a bit of work to be done. And later in the presentation, they'll show a website that if you have any suggestions or ideas after you walk away, feel free to email this email that we're going to provide for any other comments that you might think of down the road, because that happens to me all the time. I'm like, oh man, I should have said that. And then you can still continue to provide comments afterwards. So was there any other questions or comments related to the transboundary jurisdiction? Okay. Well, we're going to move on to the next topic then, which is financing.
I think Elder Hume had a comment. I saw his hand go.
I missed it. Sorry, Elder Hume. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, basically what we have up here in the north, and I don't know how widespread this really is, but at one time on building the Alaska Highway, we had a lot of military personnel up in the Yukon Territory, especially the U.S. Counterparts that built the highway and turned it over to Canada, I believe, in 1946, I think, or 47. And basically what happened there was they had, like my uncle was a pilot, and he's from the States. And my aunt married him, and he suggested that maybe, he says he was part of it, but they flew a lot of polluted drums and everything out and left them on the lakes and covered them with a huge tarp. And in springtime, all this would flush into the water system. But right now, there's quite a few lakes that are starting to show oil drums. It takes probably about 60, 70 years before these drums deteriorate. And along the shoreline on these lakes, you're finding oil drums starting to show. And basically, he gave me a list of the lakes that these drums are dropped off. And as you know, there was some toxic materials taken out of the Kluhini River not very long ago. And like I say, the military did bury a lot of stuff all over the place. So now these drums are deteriorating, and we need to continuously test the watersheds to see just how polluted they really are. I know in the Kuswa Lake area, Champagne-Ajac did a test one time, and they found out it was had a lot of fuel content flowing out of it, and I believe repellents for insects, and also the pipeline corridor runs from Haines, Alaska through to Fairbanks. They sprayed that with Agent Orange without letting the First Nations people know about it. So basically, this Agent Orange now, this is over 55 years ago. There's nothing growing on this pipeline corridor yet. So all of that Agent Orange we're finding now has flushed into the lake system, where your salmon are starting to show traces of Agent Orange. So we have to, when we go back, we start looking at these things. I have a list of the lakes that my uncle told me, and I can probably send that in. And I think, any place that you have a huge military complex, this is probably likely what had taken place a long time ago. And how do you get that information out of them? I don't know. But I think that's something that as First Nations we need to find out. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you for those comments. And I think it goes back to also what the word bubble comment on interconnected, right? How
Yes.
There's the pollutants, and then it's affecting the drinking water, but it's also affecting the salmon and so many other things, right? Quite a few years ago, when I first started out my career, I actually worked as the planner in my own community, and I did a lot of community-based research. One of the projects that I worked on was called an economic leakage study, and the leakage study did an assessment of where everyone in the community was spending their money in different areas, and showed how our community was actually supporting the region around us economically. And I think the similar thing could be done. And I think this goes back to what Donna was talking about with the water budget, right? Is how even with First Nations wanting to protect the sources of water, it's not just protecting the First Nations and their own cultural practices and food sovereignty and all of these other things that communities rely on, but it's also going to benefit the greater good of the region as well too, right? First Nations or non-First Nations, they're all going to be protected, and that all lives are going to be enhanced. Like you were saying, even with the salmon industry and other industries that are being impacted now by these practices that had happened before. Before we move on though, there are a couple of comments that I just want to direct you to in the chat. And Donna had provided a bit of a description on what a water budget policy is. So that is in the chat. If you wanted to take a look at that, and if you were interested in what a water budget policy framework is, that's included in there. It sounds really interesting. It says a water budget can provide environmental protection and monitor climate change while taking into consideration of culture, economic development potential. So that's a really good resource. Thanks for posting that, Donna. And then there are a few links. Emily has included a few links in here as well too. So there's one link to a news article that talks about bad water sickens First Nations governments. And is that a tracker? Is that what that is? I didn't click on it just yet. It's a news article. And then also there is another news article talking about how First Nations don't qualify for drinking water plans. Donna has included a YouTube video. Donna, can you just give us a little bit of a description about what the YouTube video is?
It's the story of bottled water.
Oh, okay. That's great. And then Emily, can you maybe just comment a little bit about what the YouTube link is that you shared as well?
Yeah, the one that I shared, it's a link to a documentary, which I think is on Netflix. I'd really recommend it. It's directed by Elliot Page. It's called There's Something in the Water, and it's about environmental racism that Canadian First Nations have experienced. And it's focused more so on the East Coast, but it's a really powerful documentary. So just wanted to add that there for anyone who would be interested.
Yes, I did watch that actually, and when you said the name of it, it sounded familiar, but I do recall seeing that documentary, and it is quite good. And I do think it's on Netflix as well too, if you have Netflix and can stream. Is there any other questions or comments regarding transboundary legislation? Oh, great. Nika says it is on Netflix. Thank you for sharing that. So when you get some spare time and you want to chill or do some extra reading, you can check that documentary out. Is there any other questions or comments about the boundary discussion? If you think of anything, like I said, just pop them in the comments and we'll come back to it after. If not, we're going to move on to the next topic of discussion, which is financing. And Delaney, I'm gonna leave it in your knowledgeable hands.
Yeah, alrighty. So we're moving on to our discussion topic number 4. So next slide, please. We're gonna be talking about funding and financing. So same as before, I'm just gonna walk you through the 3 main options. So option 1 is to create a national funding mechanism, such as something like the First Nations Infrastructure Institute or something similar regarding water, to apply to all First Nations under the legislation. So this would provide certainty and clarity to all parties. It's predictable, it's transparent, and it's also likely to get Crown buy-in from the very start. A con to this approach is that it might not be flexible enough, and it also may be rejected by First Nations. What we heard from First Nations in 2019 was that this might be too close to the status quo, but it was still somewhat favored as a potential option. Option 2 would be to create a partial funding arrangement that defines principles and approaches, such as a commitment to actual cost funding and asset management, but does not define the specific processes for financing. So this will help create some certainty while also allowing for flexibility and innovation at the regional level, and could be structured as something like a transitional approach, while a more permanent solution or a different kind of structure remains to be negotiated. A con to this approach is that it doesn't guarantee doesn't create a guarantee for First Nations, and risks that by default administration will fall to the same ISK policies that we're dealing with now, that have frustrated First Nations aspirations and have held up important projects in ensuring that First Nations have access to drinking water for decades. But this approach was also somewhat favored. Option 3 is just not addressing financing mechanisms in the legislation whatsoever. So this would be easy to achieve, but it was not favored in any region. So we're not really going to be talking about this one today because it's just really close to the status quo, which is what we currently saw in the Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act. So now we're going to watch a video by Kevin Page, who is the former Parliamentary Budget Officer of Canada, who's going to give us a bit more detail about funding and financing options. And the question that we're going to be looking at for discussion is the new legislation should create a funding arrangement or mechanism that defines approaches and principles. It should include funding mechanisms that commit to funding water and wastewater in its entirety, so the true costs of that, as opposed to what we're dealing with now, and that eliminates competitive funding and is also able to evolve based on changing community needs. So thank you.
Great. Is there any comments to that video before we start getting into more discussion? Is there any comments or questions about what you saw in that video? One of the last comments that he had made was about funding formulas. Does anyone have any experience with funding formulas? Elder Hume, when you were working as a counselor, did your community have any experience working with funding formulas? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically when we negotiated the Water Act, there was a bit of funding, but that was the intergovernmental allotment, that we receive every year. So part of that, we could put into water or whatever, area we needed this funding to go into. And I believe that's how it still stands today, is they get their funding on a every 5-year interval, and they can put this money wherever they feel it's needed most.
So that would probably be, do you think that approach was better than like annual? Because I know with a lot of programs, they have annual funding requests, right? Do you think that the 5-year funding block would be a more appropriate mechanism for providing funding in
Well,
for
it's
water?
definitely not enough now because of your prices that are happening today, and there's always a shortfall. So this has to be looked at again and probably put into the government, stating that more funding is required because of different areas that we run a shortfall in. And most of your governments that have negotiated an agreement, has a shortfall now. And the government needs to step up and say, okay, we agree, but they're always on the negative position all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Irving, did you have something that you wanted to comment as well?
Yeah, it might be helpful if I explain a little bit what happens south of 60 funding formulas, and I would imagine what Elder Hume is talking about is probably based on the same funding formulas that are applied in First Nations south of 60. They are outdated, have not been updated. It's about 20 years. They have reflect nothing about the true cost of operating assets, including water and wastewater, but it covers all government-funded assets, which would be roads within the community, bridges, fire hall, water and wastewater plants, community buildings, hydro power. So that is the, and I think that is what our meeting, previous meeting, where the people in the room said, if you're getting anything more, we want that too. So what we're working on right now is working with Indigenous Services Canada on revision of the ISK operation maintenance policy, and the approach is to push and advocate for 100% funding of actual costs, not 80% of a fictitious number that some consultant in Toronto came up with 20 years ago. That's how bad it is. So the point is to advocate First Nations to take on the asset management planning approach, which is the way every municipality in Canada does, and every organization in the world, New Zealand, Australia, where they determine what their costs are by determining what it's going to take them to run and operate, maintain that asset, not only for today, but for 5 years, for 10 years from now. What do they need to put aside to the day when that pump breaks down or wears out, which doesn't happen. There's not enough money provided to First Nations now to be able to do that. On a shoestring budget, they can't do that. So, so that's what has to be part and parcel of this whole exercise with safe drinking water legislation being put into force and ensuring that there are resources to support the implementation of any regulations that are coming out of it. So that's one major activity that AFN is working with Indigenous Services Canada to update the operation maintenance policy and go forward with some training awareness material on developing a asset management plan in your community, which hopefully we'll be doing next year. But also looking at the tendering policy. This tendering policy, which has been in place for 20 years, has not been updated and has caused some concerns, problems over the years of what's contained in it and what are the approvals required to deliver big contracts, water treatment plant construction, all that. So, so there's a lot more to that, and I can understand Elder Hume about saying locked into a five-year agreement. And I've heard that others, self-governing First Nations, have been locked into multi-year agreements and not able to open them up. So they have to negotiate, look ahead 5 years. What will we need in 5 years? All the while the government saying, well, we'll give you what you need today and hopefully you can run with it for the next 5 years. So there's some problems with that approach. And the bottom line is there is just not enough money. Government's not providing enough money for First Nations to adequately maintain and operate the system so they last long and they protect the safety of the First Nations.
Thank you for sharing that information, Bing. Emily, did you have a comment or question?
Just something I wanted to contribute. When Elder Chuck and Bing were talking about, you know, the federal government being stuck in these like old, outdated sort of formulas for funding. There was a recent court case that the Teslin Tlingit Council won about negotiating funding agreements with the government based on modern treaty and self-governing agreements that clearly states like funding for all citizenship, not just those that are status. because a lot of Yukon First Nations have citizens that are non-status, and to ensure that that funding includes all citizenship, both those that are status and those that are non-status. So I think that's just an important thing to consider when factoring in, funding formulas and that sort of thing.
I have a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, go ahead, Bing.
So with that, as we had our engagement in NWC more than a week ago, with that, considering the situation there with summits and Métis, First Nations, non-Indigenous people all living in the same community, would that apply, do you think, to NWT also?
Sorry, Emily, do you know if that applies to all Indigenous?
I don't know the answer to that one. I just know that, like in regards to Yukon First Nations, with those that have self-governing agreements, that is something that I'm happy to share the article as well. But yeah, I can't speak to it outside of the Yukon, unfortunately. Maybe somebody else knows the answer.
I think it does bring the point of the First Nation having the right to decide who their members are, right? Because the challenge becomes with those funding formulas that Bing was talking about is that it comes down to registered members. And as we know, we have members living in our community that are not necessarily registered members, right? So if you're really talking about safe drinking water access to whoever is living within the watershed or a community or a territory, it has to be up to the First Nation to decide who it is that they're serving and who their members are that they're serving and providing water to, right? So that I think brings up a really great question about ensuring that any kind of mechanism provides for the First Nation to decide who it is that they're serving, right? Does everyone agree with that? That should be a value system that's put into any kind of mechanism, is that the First Nation decides? Thumbs up on your reaction button. Great, getting some thumbs up here. Great. Are there any other comments or questions related to funding and finance? Oh, and Emily's popped in that decision for us into the chat, so feel free to open that up as well too. Thanks for providing that, Emily. Any other comments or questions? If not, we're going to take a quick break. So we'll take a break for 10 minutes and we'll come back. We have one more topic to discuss, which is standards and regulation, and then a bit of a roundtable, and then we'll let you wrap it up for the day. So just a little bit more time. So we'll take a 10-minute break and then come back at 4:20. How does that sound? Or no, not 4:20. Sorry, that's 4:20 my time, 1:20 your time.
Sounds good.
Great, thanks. So don't forget, if you haven't had a chance yet, to click on the Menti link and provide some comments. Feel free to do that anytime as we're working through. One of the comments that came up in the word bubble regarding the funding and finance section was that one of the concerns was about things being restrictive. Does anyone want to share who said restrictive and what they were thinking of? I mean, I have my thoughts of probably what that means, but if you would like to share your thoughts on that, that would be helpful. I'm assuming that whoever wrote restrictive was thinking that any kind of funding, I think that's true with just about anything. A lot of times when we try to put policy and procedures in place, we try to set a framework, but sometimes it can be too narrow in scope, right? Are there other concerns that any kind of funding and financing could potentially be too narrow in scope? If anyone else agrees, yes or no, thumbs up. Yeah, there it is there. Does anyone else have any other key concerns about funding and financing for the legislation?
Just one other thought to add for funding considerations would be like direct funding agreements with nations if they do have that financial capacity, and trying to avoid like going through another party that maybe has to charge like 5 or 10% admin fees. Like obviously getting the most money to the nation, if they have that financial capacity, would be beneficial if of interest to that nation.
So essentially want to be able to put as much of the money into the actual water initiatives and not through administrative and bureaucracy processes, right?
So it's Autumn here. I also agree with that, that I do feel like capacity building in that sense could cut a lot of costs. And then also like partnerships. But I do think just in regards to the fellowship participants, I think this would be really vital to, because we're just 3 people from our fellowship, but I think it would be really important to maybe if we can have something presented to the whole group. And then I feel like we'd have more of a strong sense of like working together towards some suggestions that we'd have towards this. So I just thought I would mention that because I know that in numbers that we're a lot more like we're stronger working together, and it's sometimes a little bit nerve-wracking. And I think a big part of moving into the funding and finance and that kind of stuff is like capacity building beforehand, because sometimes a lot of the words are like going over my head. But yeah, just one of my recommendations.
No, that's a really great recommendation. So thanks, Autumn, for that. If at any point in time you need some clarity on anything that's being discussed, feel free to pop it into the chat box too, and we can make sure to provide some descriptions or any kind of definitions or anything that may be needed, because I think that happens a lot when you're used to working in, specifically with acronyms, and I'm so bad for this. When you get used to working in a specific field or an industry, you just start talking the lingo and forget that not everyone is aware of what the definitions and acronyms and things are. So please feel free at any time to say, what does that mean? But yeah, is there a contact? Who would be the best contact for moving forward to engage the fellowship group?
I think Jocelyn. I'm not sure of her last name, but I'll drop it in the comment thing. I'll like search my email and see.
Great, thank you. All right, is there any other comments or questions? If not, we're going to move forward to the discussion topic number 5, which is standards and regulations. And Delaney, I'll look to you and your wisdom again.
Yes, for sure. So our last topic of the day is standards and regulations. So next slide, please. All right, so I'm just going to quickly go through the first one, which was just to set standards for operations that apply to all First Nations across Canada. This option wasn't really favored when we presented it in 2019 due to the fact it just really didn't allow for regional diversities and nations doing their own thing according to their own regulations as well. So we're not really going to talk much about this one today. We're going to focus on the other 3. So option 2 was to define a process for creating regional / local standards. So this balances the national approach with regional innovation and definition, and utilizes the legislative reform opportunity without imposing standards on First Nations. So it's kind of like acknowledging now we have this opportunity with repealing and replacing something, repealing and replacing this legislation with something that is First Nations led. So we're kind of acknowledging, okay, we can create these these regulations now, but it still allows for nations to kind of see what that means for themselves. The con to this approach is that implementation costs may be high. It leaves uncertainty as to outcomes, and it may entrench provincial or territorial boundaries and approaches and apply them to First Nations. So this approach was somewhat favored. Option 3 was to not address standards directly in the legislation or regulations at all. So this approach would be pretty easily accomplished and does allow for nations to define for themselves their own approach when they're ready to do so. But it just totally doesn't address operation standards at all. It's likely to create a patchwork of standards, which would be more difficult to deal with and very complex and difficult to work with. And it really perpetuates the status quo, which is kind of the context we're living in right now with the current legislation. And furthermore, it leaves First Nations vulnerable to exploitation by third parties and to cost-cutting measures, which should not be permissible in the face of enforceable standards. So it's the status quo, and it wasn't favored at all. The option 4 was the most favored option. It would be to define some national standards and delineate others for local and regional development. So it's kind of like a balanced approach that has the national standards at the top that nations can work with, but also allows for innovation and local and regional diversities as well. So if properly implemented, it can capture some of the best elements of option 1 and option 2. So you can adopt, for example, certain measures such as water quality requirements for drinking water or engineering standards, which are universally supported as national standards, and others, such as source water planning, which inherently calls for local input. So it's kind of that national and local balance. It supports more innovation. It's more respectful of the autonomy of nations than single uniform standards for all elements. The cons is that it may be difficult to reach agreement on what elements are national versus what are local. So it could lead to some regional divisions or conflict, and it also could be resisted by the Crown, who looks for a single solution. But this was the most favored option by First Nations. So this is the one we're going to be talking a bit more about today. So next slide, please. So the video we're going to be watching is led by Phil Tangi. And the question that we're going to be looking at is the new legislation should define some national standards and delineate others for local or regional development, and must include reference to First Nations culture, laws, and the spiritual relationship with water as being important components of the development of water standards. And Phil's going to talk about that more in his video. Thank you.
Great video. Was there any comments or questions related to the video that we just saw? So I know that, I don't believe anyway, I should confirm. Is there anyone on the call today that is an operator or has operator training? If you do, just give a little hands up. I didn't think so. So one of the question on the Mentimeter right now is, should there be some definition of standards that and delineate others? Sorry, let me say this again. Should there be some standards in the new legislation? There it is there. Define some national standards and delineate for other local regional development. And it must include reference to laws and the spiritual relationship to water. And in the video, he had a very technical background, right? So I'm sure that he was probably very well aware of what the provincial regulations are. But since we don't have any water operators on the line today, he was talking about a couple of things. One being the women are the keepers of the water, and women have a responsibility, and that there should be some First Nations perspective in those standards. What does anyone have any ideas of what sorts of things should be included to direct that First Nations lens into any kind of standards? What sorts of things could be incorporated into standards related to water? Does anyone have any ideas?
I can just jump in here briefly. based on some of my experience, I used to work for an environmental consulting firm here in town, and we did a lot of water quality testing, mostly on like abandoned mine sites here in the Yukon. And the standards that we use, they're called CCME. It stands for Canadian Council of like the Minister of Environment or something. But a lot of those standards are like super, like they're chemistry based. So there's no like sort of cultural component to those standards. Like it runs through like alphabetically, like aluminum and different types of chemicals that could be in the water. So I think in terms of including like a First Nations like worldview when it comes to water and like the importance of water, I think that would be a great idea. But I know it would be like challenging because the government seems to operate on like a very like technical level when it comes to water quality standards.
Do you think that there are ways to get specifically youth involved? I think that one of the challenges that he was talking about was that there isn't the interest from the community side to get operators in, right? And I'm wondering whether or not it's because the regulations are so technical. Maybe we could do it on the flip side. What do you think would get youth and community members more interested in becoming involved in capacity building related to water regulation and community?
Yeah, a couple thoughts come to mind. When I was watching that video, Autumn Peltier was coming to my mind. She was named water commissioner by the Anishinaabe Nation. And she is such an amazing young woman. And she really is a huge advocate for First Nations water rights. And I find she's incredibly inspiring. Like to see women doing this sort of work is really uplifting and inspiring for youth. So, you know, having more water warriors like in the spotlight, you know, would probably help encourage other youth and young people to like want to engage in this type of work. And also, yeah, like wages and salaries, like ensuring, I think in that video, he was saying there's like a big discrepancy in wages and salaries of like First Nations or Indigenous water operators and those that maybe work for like the municipality. So obviously ensuring that like those wages are competitive and that they're being fairly compensated for their work. Yeah, and I would open it up to some of the other youth fellows to share their thoughts as well.
So from a youth perspective, if there was to be a campaign or something developed in order to encourage you specifically, what would you like to see if you were going to get involved in a water initiative in your community? What kind of job would you like to do related to water?
For myself, I definitely.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just wrote down earlier during the talk, one moment, let me find it. How do we treat wastewater on a YUKON level, on a Whitehorse level, and then on as a community level? I guess that is something that I would like to maybe see more addressed towards our youth, because I know for Carmax, we're on septic, a lot of it. And so, you know, just to be like joking around, you know, like as a kid laughing with my cousins, like, you're going to grow up to be the poop truck driver. Like, I don't know, I guess there is a stigma for that. Like, we have to kind of take that away. We can't be really laughing at these jobs that we desperately need. I'm not too sure how we would bridge that gap though, but I would be really interested in it. I do agree with what Emily said about with like, or mentioning about Autumn Pelletier and how he talks about how women are like the water keepers. I remember years ago learning about a quote that like, in terms of education, if you teach a boy, he will learn, but if you teach a girl, she'll go back and she'll take that back to her community and teach others and, you know, grow from that. So I don't know, I guess we need to have, you know, like in the Yukon, I know we do have some really awesome programs like women in trades and stuff like that. Like, I feel like we really need to hit more hard for that, for like different kind of jobs or different stuff for that, especially really focusing on Indigenous youth and how we should empower them for wanting to take the initiative to take the leads like this. I definitely am more open to wanting to take these courses and wanting to do it. So if this was something that was, say, offered through like the YUKON University or through any other programs, I would be very interested. And I know a few other youth that would be, but I feel like we have to put those things in place first. And until then, I really like that last video. What he said is there are no easy answers, and First Nations must lead. So I really like those. I wrote those down. So yeah, thank you.
That's great. Thanks for your feedback. And that's great. That's a great point. I really like when you talked about the stigma of the poop truck driver, right? And as kids, like, so the funny thing is that my uncle actually is the water manager, the water treatment officer, and he also started the septic, the waste truck as well too here. So I know that they have a hard time. Well, they had a hard time getting people employed in that area because of the stigma. So I'm really glad that you raised that. But you're right, like it's a really important job in our communities to provide those services to our community members. So I think that's a great point. Autumn, did you have something that you wanted to say?
Yeah, so mine is pretty much encompassed by what Nika said. I think that we need to honor both sides of things. Like you need to honor having water warriors and kind of people on the front lines, people who are fighting, down south for all those different things around the community. I know I have lots of friends that are down south doing those things, but at the same time, you need people who are writing the documents and doing the legislation, right? And to be honest, I think I'm more of like the warrior. I would rather be out on the land and being able to really connect on that level and being able to share a story through there and being able to maybe bring people out and kind of share with them why water is so sacred, right? Because some people just haven't had the opportunity where that a lot of us as Indigenous people just are raised in, that we connect. And I know my grandma, when I was just a little girl, I was raised that like water was really serious. So I wasn't ever to play around it. And it was always a really serious thing. And that's something that has stuck with me my whole life, but not everyone has that. So I guess just to create even more positions to build people's capacity in that sense, but also kind of create, I think, more of, I wouldn't want to say a position, like a youth position, maybe like I know this fellowship that I'm in right now that all of us are in has been like building my capacity more than a lot of positions I have been in the past, right? Because we have all these different speakers and they're just really sharing us a lot of stories and a lot of, different, like we got to speak with this really awesome person from New Zealand, right? And I would have never known that we had so many similarities with our plights and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess just to create more opportunities to like build capacity and then, but not only just do it in the sense where we're learning, but have a place that we can use and foster to use like our hands-on learning and being able to actually connect with the land and with the water that we're fighting for. So
great. That's great feedback. Thank you, Autumn. Donna, are you still on the line?
Yep.
Do you have any, since you've been doing so much on the ground work with water, do you have any suggestions as to maybe some of the things that could be incorporated for standards or for including First Nations laws and spiritual relationships?
Not really anything to add that's been said already. I just wanted to point out too that NND does have land guardians. We also have lands officers. We have a couple environmental monitors who are a couple of youth who went through some environmental monitoring training that we have here in the Yukon. We also have some of those students that are mentoring other younger students to engage them and get them interested in taking that environmental monitoring training. We have 2 in-house mining liaisons right now, one for Vitgold and one for Lexco. We're hoping to eventually combine those 2 and develop our own mining monitoring program here in-house. And we're just working on all that now and making connections in collaborations with Yukon government for joint patrols and joint training opportunities and stuff like that. So it's happening. It's slow, but it's happening.
That's interesting. So it sounds like you're already doing some co-development work in other areas of legislation. We're
trying.
That's great. And can you maybe give some insight on that process?
We're just in the process of in a bit of a lag right now. Yukon government, their mining officer, their senior mining officer had just moved away from Mayo. So it's just being restaffed again. And we're hoping that the relationship will continue to grow once that is, that position's filled again.
Okay, great. Are there any other comments or questions? Elder Hume, do you have any perspectives on how we could incorporate some First Nations laws or spirituality into regulation?
Okay, you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of think that we really need to focus on, training a lot of the younger generation. Right now with Champigny-Ajac, we have 2 people that are already trained. I think they're class 2s but there's never ever enough pay. So they move on to different positions. And you can continue training and until the money is there, it's going to be hard to keep them, especially if you're looking at a wage, that's not comparable to YDG wages or federal wages. First Nations always get what seems to be just left over. And we need to get by that and properly train. I mean, I myself, I have 2 of my children that are both engineers. One is 3 degrees in electronics, and the other is structural engineer. And these are areas, it's really difficult to keep them focused, because if you're an electronic engineer, you're age 50, you're retired. You've already made your money, and so why continue on? And I think when I say younger generation, we need to get that education into their laps, and we have to start out by teaching this very important resource in the education department, which isn't taught very much. Water is a very big focus. It's traditionally, we've used it all our lives. We've treated it just like a mother, and it feeds our family. It's, I know girls were never ever allowed to play, or even boys, around the salmon spawning stream. And the Tluckshaw area runs right by the front of my house. I don't allow my kids to play in the water. It belongs to the fish. And there's an old story on that this young girl had her grandmother had told her, you don't play in that water because the fish is going to take you. And one day when nobody's looking, she went down to the creek and started playing in the water, and her grandmother had made her a necklace out of beads. The first beads were from the Russians, and when she went down to play in the water when nobody was looking, she disappeared, and nobody knew where she went. And for the longest time, they looked and hunted all over, and finally they had a short ceremony because there was no body there. They just had a ceremony. They talked about her. And 4 years later, this fish came up, and grandmother ran up and down the creek, and she caught it with her hands, and that fish had a necklace around his neck. And so this is why, you look at the spirit of the fish is part of our people. And that's why, we respect the fish, we respect the water. Everything we take, we only take a little. We always leave an offering. And this is why, when I look at what's taking place today, that respect is gone. It's First Nations still hold it. We make sure that the water passage is clear for our people down below, especially the US counterparts. But they do the opposite, they overharvest their salmon. And what they leave us is we've probably spent 10 years now without fishing in the Tlakshu region. We have to go down to Haines, Alaska, where our cousins are, and get fish off of them. We take moose meat down and trade them. And the trade and barter has been there for thousands of years. But now you have customs that say, well, you shouldn't be doing that. We won't allow you across the border. And there's things like that with this COVID that's taken place now, and I find it hard because a lot of my relatives on the Alaska side are saying, we need moose meat, we need help, but we can go as far as the border, and the border will turn us back because we're not essential. And I think these are areas when you trade and barter, especially with the borders. First Nations, if I know I've had both of my shots and whatnot to prevent me from catching the COVID, I think it's you should be allowed access, especially if you're trading for moose meat for fish. We need fish up here. They need moose meat down there. So it's important, on our trade routes. When we look at the whole issue of trade and barter, it's salmon, it's our sustenance. This is something we lived off of. We're raised up on, and so this is why we treat our salmon with, and we try to protect our spawning beds. Right now, our spawning beds are getting weeded in because the overharvesting that the U.S. counterparts are doing. And when I say overweeding, there's less salmon. The big spawning areas are gone now. And this is likely what's happening on the Yukon River. Your salmon are getting less all the time. And basically it's overharvesting. You're losing that salmon spawning beds. And that has gone now to weeds, so your salmon have, less areas to spawn, so the population is getting smaller and smaller. And we have to be real careful, how we treat our fish, especially even the freshwater fish are doing the same thing. I was saying yesterday at the session there that permafrost melt off. we have to study what's coming out of that permafrost. And I think it's very important that when this permafrost was formed, it was formed thousands of years ago. And there's different seeds that's coming out of there that's being planted all over now. People are saying these seeds that we need to get rid of, these plants we need to get rid of, but you got to remember when these seeds were buried, they were developed for an animal that probably bigger than the moose and caribou we have today. And is it capable of feeding our moose and caribou? Why are our moose now moving from the Yukon into the Old Crow region, where there never was hardly any moose, even up into the Arctic now? They're moving out of here. Because is there a problem with what's coming out of the permafrost? They know that ahead of time. This is why they're moving. So there's a lot of traditional knowledge, that I can share about what's taking place. Even the scientists are saying that the beavers are moving north. I know your porcupine have made that huge migration north. So your animals will leave this country, which happened a long time ago. And this is what my grandmother said. Our people up here starved to death because we had no fish. We had nothing to eat. We had to follow where the caribou went. And our people went way up north, the ones that survived. And if you meet with some of the people in the Northwest Territories, the Dene, they say, yes, we had a big meeting. Our people met a long time ago. And henceforth, some of us had to leave. And this is what my grandmother said. Our people had to leave and were told to follow the mountain range. And lo and behold, we never knew this for the longest time. But you look at the Navajo, they speak our language. And you look at the Apache, they speak the same language as Old Crow. So definitely our people went north, the ones that in this country are starved to death. There was nothing left up here. What was left over was burnt up, dried up in the exposed permafrost. And as the permafrost melted, it ran into the rivers and lakes. And my grandmother said there's some sickness in that frozen ground. She says it kills fish, it kills animals. As you can portray what happened in Russia, where they found a huge reindeer herd all dead. And they did a study and that came out of the permafrost. And that was that anthrax, which melted out of the permafrost. So that's embedded also in permafrost. So you got to remember, we need to study what's in that permafrost. How much danger is it going to create for our fish, for our livelihood, for our people? Is that time coming again? And this is what the elders have always told us. You have to get ready for hard times again. Thank you.
Thank you for those words. That was so interesting. There's a couple of points that I pulled out from there. One, going back to the concerns about things being too restrictive, right? Like sometimes at this point in time, we don't even know what we don't know, right? Until we get to the point where we're able to do some of those studies and understand what maybe some of the impacts of climate change are. If there's any kind of legislation or standards that are too restrictive and not able to adapt to what's happening at the local level, you could be creating more problems, right? And yeah, that story about the permafrost was really interesting. And about, I really liked the note about how the Navajo and the Apache speak the same language as Old Crow. So that does really lead to there being, there having had been changes in the past that are now leading, that we're seeing coming to fruition again, right? One of the other things that I had pulled out from there was the story about the fish and the young girl. I thought was really interesting, and how there should be maybe some mechanisms in place to be able to incorporate knowledge through storytelling, or things that are maybe not always valued as they're maybe not incorporated into values such as standards, right? But I think that there's a lot to be learned by stories like that that could be incorporated. I think one of the other challenges too, when you're talking about the spawning, the salmon spawning site, is that the way that governments operate is they're also siloed. I had done some work with Chiefs of Ontario last year with the Department of Fisheries, and we were out talking about fish habitat. And the thing that I thought was interesting is that they have very specific things about what they consider to be fish and fish habitat, and what is considered, what they look after and what another department looks after, right? So the challenge becomes is that when you're trying to incorporate these things at the local level, you might be dealing with 3 or 4 different ministries in order to tackle one challenge that is coming out in terms of maybe like drinking water. You're also having to look to other areas to be able to find some solutions there, right? So maybe something that can be a little bit more comprehensive, and something that can include perspectives from like multiple departments and multiple ministries, instead of having a First Nations trying to weed out who does what and where am I going for this information, right? So that was really great. Thank you for that. Was there any other comments or questions about what Elder Hume had shared with us? Okay, seeing none. That was really great. Is there any other comments or questions or comments about incorporating national standards into the legislation? So I'm going to look to our Mentimeter again really quick. And the question is, do you agree that the new legislation should define some national standards and delineate others for local regional development? Oh, we're going to pop it up here. There we go. And must include reference to First Nations culture, laws, and spiritual relationship with the water as being important component of the development of water standards. So there was a couple of responses that it should be incorporated. The next question was the word bubble, and what are some key concerns about standards and regulations? So some concerns are, is that a response, or is that part of the Mentimeter?
That's a response.
Okay, so some of the concerns are the scope. Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Making sure that it's not too refined and focused, that you're creating concerns like we had just talked about. That it being too restrictive, that's definitely a concern. Is there any other concerns about that? About standards and regulations in the legislation? Do you think that the legislation should be more maybe like high level or visionary, or do you think it should include standards? Can I get the reaction, the yes or no or thumbs up if you think that it should be high level? Do you think that it should include some standards and regulations? Yep, there's some for standards and regulations. A couple for standards and regulations, that's good. And I think that kind of goes back to the one video that talked about having the national level, having that broad scope of setting some standards, right? So what I mean by standards and regulations is that in terms of water, and I think that in the last video, the operator commented on a little bit, it was sometimes standards and regulations are based on like science. To say, in terms of how we define clean water, we define it as this. And right now, under most water legislations, it has to do with chemistry, right? So you can only have certain elements of water that are at certain levels. And Bing, do you have a response? You could maybe assist with
Yeah,
this.
I was going to jump in there and pull you out.
Yay, thank you.
I was going to address, I think Nico had a question there about what's the difference between standards and regulations. So probably the best best example to use is the current Safe Drinking Water for First Nations Act. It's an enabling legislation that gives the government authority to develop regulations. So when you develop regulations, you need to look at what standards are you going to be employing. So it's kind of a set process of developing a legislation. And the other one that I like to use is the Fisheries Act. A few years ago, we got involved. I got involved in changes to the Fisheries Act because the Fisheries Act's been around for a while, but they're still making changes to the legislation, changing the regulations within the Fisheries Act. So when legislation is what they call is promulgated out there for taking it out to say the regions to develop their regulations. So they would develop regulations saying you have to have certified operators. They have to be licensed by some agency. Doesn't have to be the province. Could be a First Nations wastewater authority that will look after First Nations operators only. And then you say, well, to what standard do they need to be certified? So you have to start developing those standards. Do they have to have grade 12, which is now a requirement in most provinces? Could it be grade 10? Some provinces. So it's kind of a layered approach in terms of develop legislation, and then you develop the regulations, and then you develop the standards that are going to support the regulation. So, for example, in Saskatchewan, the levels of arsenic allowable are much higher than the rest of Canada, or what is allowed within the Canadian Drinking Water Quality Guidelines. So Saskatchewan decided to develop a standard that's higher than the rest of Canada. So there's more risk to people who live in Saskatchewan because their water now contains higher levels of arsenic than the rest of Canada, and even higher than the US EPA, which is moving towards zero arsenic. So it's kind of a progression and saying, okay, what's going to be good for our region? What's going to be good for our people? You might develop more tougher standards than the rest of Canada because of, for example, the good example of the H. pylori. How do you develop standards to not allow that bacterium to get into your water supply? How strict you need to be? Should it be? And sometimes it's, I don't want to get too technical, but it's how much log removal. In other words, do you need to get 99.9% out of the water? Do you need to get 99.99%? Do you need to go all the way to 99.99%? 999% or log, 4 log, 5 log. So it's those standards you need to set. And that's where I think really the real work begins after you develop your regulation. So hope that helps a bit.
Yes, thank you. So that does help, I think. The other thing to consider is that I think regulations are about being compliant, right? Like you'll set the standard like Bing is talking about. So how much you're going to allow of something to happen or what your standard of acceptable behavior is within a certain area. And your regulation is how you are going to be compliant with that standard. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Got it.
So, and Bing was talking about very specific things like arsenic and H. pylori, but you could potentially include things like traditional knowledge. You could potentially include traditional knowledge, things like salmon levels or different sorts of things into that as well, to be able to measure the health of your source water. So those are things that.
A good example we heard last year, Amy, and others was somebody saying, a newborn, I need to bathe my newborn in clean water. But if your water is contaminated, what level of contamination do you have to remove so you can bathe your firstborn in clean water? Like you can't go down to the river anymore, to the lake, because we know it's contaminated. And so how do you, I think that's a good example of traditional building customary laws into the regulations.
Oh, I love that example, Bing. I think that's a great example. Are there any thoughts or comments about that discussion? Yeah, we got some thumbs up for that. I think that is a really good example of how to incorporate some traditional knowledge and indigenous perspective into the regulations. That's great. Does that help Nika with understanding the difference between standards and regulations? Great. Is there any other comments or questions related to that topic? Not, we do have a bit of a roundtable discussion. So the roundtable is really about talking about what goes on from here and maybe some suggestions of where to move on forward in terms of engagement. So like we had read earlier, the AFN is going to be presenting the framework at the Winter Assembly in December. So maybe some of the things that we might want to talk about during this roundtable is was there anything that didn't come up either yesterday or today that should be included in the conversation? How would you like to be involved moving forward? And again, there's that website moving forward. If you have any other ideas or comments or questions after we leave here today, please feel free to reach out through that web or that email address and be able to continue to provide your insight. One question I actually had, hold on, let me find my note here, was in terms of, oh, my writing is so horrible right now. There was one, let me find it here. Just give me 1 second. There was one question on the Menti poll that I wanted to kind of discuss a little bit more. I just need to find it. Oh, it's gone now. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the Menti. Oh, there it is right there. So things that are missing from the discussion is examining holistic impacts of climate change, incorporating First Nations traditional knowledge and worldviews of water into national standards and legislation. That's great. And water is connected to everything and will need an interconnected approach. So one of the questions that I have for you is how, knowing that everyone is busy and everyone usually always has a number of different projects on the go, how would you like to be involved going forward? Would you like there to be more discussion like this? Would you like to see some models and examples? How can AFN continue to move forward? Courtney, did you have a question or a comment?
It was more, and I think it was, I may be a little late for it, but I just want to, Emily and I were having a good discussion kind of during one of the breaks, and just realizing, especially for this discussion in particular, it would really benefit from input from leadership, from Yukon First Nations leadership, and then unfortunately they are in a leadership meeting today, so weren't able to make it, but we are going to commit to taking this information and being able to distribute it out and provide opportunity for them to comment as well. So I see your notes about the website or the email address and everything, so we can connect. But I just wanted to note that for everyone here. So thanks. I realize maybe I'm a little late with that comment now because you seem to move past it. So sorry about that.
No, sorry. Sorry, I didn't leave enough time. Yeah.
Thanks.
Is there any other comments about is there any other comments or suggestions about how to move forward from here and how to continue the conversation? This is really a very important conversation, and water, as we know, impacts everybody and it impacts everything. Just like the Mentimeter is saying, it's connected to everything. How can the AFN move forward on a framework that is going to be reflective of the water issues that you're seeing in your region? Would you like there to be another set of engagement? Would you like there to be more resources? What sorts of things can be provided? Yeah, Adam.
So I was just thinking that to run this again, I think it would be really, I love this one today, but I feel like it would be really beneficial to almost focus and hone in on like an elder youth kind of representation, or like an elder youth, I don't want to say gathering because it's more of just relaying the information to them, but making sure that we could get some different kind of, I don't know, just some more feedback from other, because there is a kind of small group today and it's such an important conversation. And I feel like I took so much from this. So to be able to just get it out to people, and maybe that's through a video, or maybe that's through, you know, like some multimedia kind of thing. Because I know for the younger generations, a lot of things that like personally that I connect with, like, is TED Talks and just different videos that have lots of visuals of being out on the land and being like fishing and salmon, and, you know, and if different communities were able to submit videos, you'd feel a lot more a part of it and you'd feel a lot more together. So just an idea there.
That's great. That's a great idea.
I have some ideas for that and how to get videos submitted to one spot. So maybe we can talk about that someday.
Yeah. Blow your horn there, Evan. They're the ones who developed those videos.
Oh, for sure, 100%. Whatever you guys want.
Yeah. I take your commission.
So do you think it would be helpful to see some actual examples of clauses, or examples of, just like Delaney had showed, a couple of different options and what some of the pros and cons of that? Do you think that should be that would be helpful for moving the dialogue forward, is to have options and then discuss options? Yep, some thumbs up on that. Would you like to be involved in in more of the development side? Do you think there should be more opportunity for saying this is what needs to be examined? Like, do you think that you have some ideas of what? Yeah, there's some thumbs up with that. So an opportunity to provide insight into options, and then coming back to the group to say, these are the options that we were directed to. What do you think about these options? How does that sound? Is there any other comments or questions you think about the engagement moving forward, or any other perspectives on water that need to be included on a go forward basis? So we do have some time still left for the roundtable. If you're comfortable, I welcome you to just to come off mute and give us some feedback about what you thought of the last 2 days, and provide any other comments or questions that you might have.
I'll go first.
Great.
I think it's been awesome couple days, lots to take in and lots to absorb, and lots to jigsaw with the things that we're already doing. And I just look forward to seeing how this rolls out into the future. And I just wanted to add too, on the standards and regulation side of it, we can have as many standards as we want, but unless they're regulated, they're never going to do them. And that's the problem. As long as it's not regulated and they're allowed to do it as best practices, because it's money in their pocket and money that they have to spend, we have to enforce this. It has to be regulated, and that's all there is to it. The mining industries that we find in my traditional territory, they even work around best practices. We have laws for how they do tailing ponds and how they do that. And last year it was shocking to find that it's actually common practice for some of our old time miners to open up their tailings ponds at the end of the year and let them flow. And that's just a best practice that they're asked not to do that. And that's so wrong. It should be regulated that they're not allowed to do that. So that's just an example. Thanks.
That's really great feedback, Donna. Thank you so much. I actually have one more question for you, if you don't mind. I know that you had talked about some of the work that you're doing with the mining industry. How do you, have you had any experience in enforcement?
We're just starting to get into that now. A couple of years ago, we have started our lands officers program. They're joined now by lands guardians. And like I said earlier, we're just trying to work together collaboratively with YUKON government to do joint patrols. Without that collaboration, our guys do go out and do patrols, and we're sending them through training and working with I actually just got a message, my phone went off. We're working with our relations around us, Selkirk First Nation, Little Salmon First Nation, they're Northern Shoshone First Nations, all three of us. And we're going to start working on joint training and opportunities for our lands officers and land guardians on our own, just because we need to do that. We need more presence on the land. We need more eyes observing, and we definitely need to be hearing about more of the destruction and be able to address it right away. That's one of the problems too, is the time it takes us to the turnaround time. When we found out about that tailings pond that was broke open, the only way we found out was because we just happened to be doing a moose survey, and our lands officer happened to be in the helicopter. They just happened to be flying over this one creek, and they could see that it was just pure sediment, like pure, just muddy sediment. And they know that creek was not like that. And they followed the creek until they actually saw where that slurry of mud was coming from. This was a Saturday. So by the time the proponent actually seen them in the sky. So by Monday, the tailings pond was all banked back up and it was an accidental breach. We know that that's not the truth. They were caught red-handed and they just tried to cover it up. So we'll be looking out for more of that. And we plan on doing a lot more monitoring to keep our eyes open for that kind of stuff that we weren't really aware of that could potentially be happening on our traditional territory before. So it was just a really a big eye opener for us.
That's really helpful insight. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's sometimes difficult for me because as a person, I always try to think that people are doing the best that they can, but that there are so many times that I'm proven wrong, and it is disheartening some days.
I'm with you on that, and I think that is one of the problems that we have too is through our agreements, we expect everybody to be doing the best that they can within our traditional territory under our final agreements, which are legally binding. But we are finding that a lot of the times we're chasing our tail, and even confronting Yukon government to say, you're not even upholding your own regulations on your side. And we need to work better together to collaboratively make sure that all of these aspects are taken care of and protected and conserved the way that they're supposed to be in the intent and spirit of those final agreements.
Mm-hmm. I think that your experience there could be really helpful, I think, to this process and making sure that on a go-forward basis that things like that are included and considered in the legislation. Thank you so much, Donna. And I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but Autumn, is there anything else you want to add before we conclude? I'm just going to go through and check in with everyone.
Yeah, sure. I think today we had some really good conversations, and I just want to say good sheesh for everyone for everything they had to share, because I feel like I learned a lot and I took a lot away today. I think something important moving forward that I always bring up time and time again is the implementation of our Indigenous language and culture into the work that's to come. So trying to decolonize our best in the legislature and just how we do the work. I think it was so nice to start today with a prayer, in the language, and hopefully soon when we're doing in-person meetings again, that we can connect on that level. But I'm grateful that there's this platform that we can at least do this work, because the work doesn't stop because of the pandemic. If anything, it really showed us that we need to really get our butts in gear, because the break that Mother Earth had during that time, and then starting just right back up again, we're starting to see all the effects. And it was just crazy to really put it into perspective that throughout that whole time when when everyone wasn't driving, and you could really see the difference, which is kind of mind-blowing, that you could see that difference, that we're the cause of all this. So now we need to really work towards healing our mother, towards healing our Mother Earth. And that's what we're doing here today. And so I'm pretty excited to see this work's being done, because in recent years, I've really, after returning home, that's when I've started to get into this work. So I'm just really grateful for all the work that you guys have done, and thank you for your presentations today.
Thank you, Autumn. That was really great comment. Courtney, did you have any comments that you want to provide?
I don't think anything else from me. Just wanted to thank everyone again on a really great session and really great discussions. And I mean, I learned so much from these, from hearing from everyone whose work is in the community and on the ground, and all of the sacred knowledge that Elder Hume had provided to us, but also all the sacred knowledge that we hear from the youth here today, Autumn and Nika and Dustin. I heard a little bit from you yesterday, and just even your presence here and learning. Really appreciate you being here, and Donna as well. Just really love your perspectives and really appreciate that kind of like holistic and broad lens that you bring to this discussion. So thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Bing, did you have any comments that you wanted to provide?
I just want to thank everybody for sharing the information. As I said, I always learn. It's always a learning experience, and grateful for information that was shared. Glad to have youth involved here, and I think we take to heart that youth has to be more involved, and I think I'm tasking Delaney to, I think she has a task, she hasn't mentioned, of planning a youth water summit at some point. So I think she's taken down names across the country. So very good to have youth. You're right. I think us old timers might get jaded after a while, but we need the exuberance of youth, and youth as warriors is very important. I think every youth today is a warrior in some way, fashion, and they look after, their own 7 generations coming up. So thank everybody. Chimiwich, Kona Chish, Nyam Koa, Amy, Miwich.
Thank you, Bing. I totally agree with you that it's very refreshing to have youth brought into conversations, because yes, I can see my jadedness coming in some days, and I really do value the fresh perspective of youth and the hopefulness. So I'm really glad that we had a lot of youth on the call today. Emily, did you have any comments?
Yeah, thanks. I would just like to echo what everyone else has been saying. I just wanted to thank Elder Chuck for starting us in a good way and for his amazing contributions. I've really enjoyed spending time with him, even over the lunch. I'm always listening and learning from him, so I'm so grateful for that. Yeah, I just wanted to thank the team, all the folks that are helping facilitate and note take, and all the tech support, to the AFN team and Courtney, Delaney, and all of our participants. I'm really proud of our youth fellows for participating and sharing and really enriching these conversations. I'm constantly inspired and uplifted by our youth, and I'm so proud to get to work with them. And yeah, the last few days have been great. Really important to have these discussions about water, and I'm looking forward to, the next steps and putting all of these great ideas into motion. Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Emily. Delaney, when you're organizing your water summit, Emily has agreed to be a primary contact to be able to help pull the youth together, the fellows together again.
Awesome. That would be great. That's awesome. I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today, and thank you, Courtney and Emily, for all the work you put into organizing this, and Aspen for making this space available to us. It's been really great, and I feel like I've learned a lot. I've taken so many notes. I look forward to hopefully continuing these discussions in the future, hopefully out on the water as well, which would be really awesome. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Delaney. Nika, did you have any comments?
First off, I'd like to say thank you for allowing me to participate and join in on this. I unfortunately missed yesterday, and I'm a little bit sad because it sounds like you guys had some really phenomenal panels and talks, but I really look forward to hopefully meeting you guys in person and being more part of stuff like this. I'm very thankful for the opportunity, and I got really excited when Donna was talking about the Northern Shoshone and kind of like coming together as a collective and doing land guardianship, because I'm really, really, really interested in stuff like this. I'm really passionate about the salmon. And in my own community, I constantly feel like I'm like just running on my own. Like I don't see anybody else standing with me in these big talks or these pivotal things. So it's really nice to hear Donna say that, like, in a way she's behind the scenes there. So that's nice to see. So I really look forward to collaborating with each and every one of you guys in the future. Masicho, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you, Nika. Great comments. Melissa, did you have anything that you wanted to comment on?
Me?
Yeah.
I had to be very careful that I am the note taker, and I got so involved in some of the discussions. I really wanted to leap in myself, but it was so interesting to listen to, and I've really enjoyed doing this work for you.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Dustin, did you have any comments you wanted to make?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for letting me sit in on this. Sorry I couldn't be a little bit more involved. I have a company and I had to do a bunch of in-house work, so listening to all of this while I was doing that kept me pretty entertained, at least, and a lot to think about. Thank you very much again, and hope everyone has a good rest of the week.
Thank you, Dustin. And just to comment on what Dustin was talking about, I know that everyone has so much work that's going on. There's always 1,000 different priorities. So thank you so much for joining and taking the time to be with us today. And Elder Hume, I'm going to save the last comments for you. Do you have any other comments or amazing insights you can share with us? Because I've just really valued listening to you today.
Okay, we got it unmuted.
Got it?
Yeah. Okay. You know, when I look back and the youth, you know, are really speaking up on what they've heard today, and I think it's very important that we keep them and give this information and continue this information. And it's my sense that, you know, each and every youth should be going around the community and gathering information from their elders. And, you know, because our elders are moving on at a fast rate right now. And we need to start documenting some of that information. And myself being a national park warden, I spent 20 years at it and did my RCMP training in riding Mountain National Park. So I was probably the only national park warden across Canada that was issued a sidearm. And I worked a lot with the state troopers, a lot with the RCMP. And it's very important when I look back at this whole situation, you know, and it's sitting right in front of me is the National Parks Act. You can adopt, you know, what's in that National Parks Act because they've spent a lot of money, a lot of years, a lot of dollars on the information on protection of the national park. So why can't we adopt some of that information? You know, it protects our lands, it protects everything that's within a national park. I know the old National Parks Act read that we will remove Indian people from the national parks. And that was one of the, that was in the act. But now they have the new act and it protects everything that to a standard where people are hiking, it's pristine, they can drink water any place. Maybe we need to look at that. We should open that book up and say, we want this in our traditional territories. But anyways, it's been very, very good. And I really enjoyed what I heard today. And I think it's very important that we continue on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If there's no other comments or questions, I just wanted to provide one more message that Courtney had left in the chat. And Courtney will be following up with all participants regarding the honorariums for yesterday and today. Okay, just to let everyone know. And if there's nothing further, Elder Hume, I am going to ask if you would mind having a closing prayer for us.
Sure, yes. Can you hear me? Okay, I'll say this in my traditional language, and I'm going to thank the First Nations, that the traditional territory that we're on, and when we go home, be careful how you're driving, and always give thanks for our children that we leave at home, and especially our grandchildren. Panikshis, Tajao, Nara that na Shokwithan Gakuchi, Shokuch na Shu, Tajao, wa Dajuna na Shu, Shokwithan Gogantache, wa Jauna de Kel, Shokuch no Tanuga Kucha, Shokuch na Dajao Shu, wa Ita. Kwanan garati ta on wa kwanlindan kwanan shokuche hudo konekshish kanako konekshish. Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, we'll go. So from here at Six Nations of the Grand River in Ontario, thank you for spending the day with me, even if it was only virtually. I wish I could actually be there with you in person. It would be a lovely trip. If you see the Gold Pinner restaurant anytime soon, please acknowledge it for me. I spent many of hours in there cleaning tables and serving food, and it was a very cherished time in my life. So thank you very much for spending the day with us. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and we will get back to you with any comments or concerns that you might have. Thanks, everyone. Have a safe journey home.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
See ya.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.